The committee will come to order. Under the House Republican majority, this committee has been laser focused on helping Americans in need, and in particular doing so by helping them build stable, prosperous lives through work. That is the very core of our work to improve our welfare programs, including TANF. We took an important first step to reform TANF, direct cash assistance, in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. For the first time in 2 decades, Congress acted to close loopholes states were using and strengthen work requirements. Unfortunately, TANF non-assistance, which makes up 77% of the spending in the program, has been undermined by rampant waste, fraud, and abuse, meaning fewer dollars are going to services for those who really need them. For example, in the state of Mississippi, $77 million in misused TANF funds led to multiple criminal convictions for embezzlement by state officials and nonprofit contractors. But we all know this problem is not limited to Mississippi. In Michigan, millions of dollars in TANF funds were spent on college aid for families making up to $250,000 to attend primarily private colleges. In California, the state used federal TANF funds to plug holes in their state budget. We could go around the country and identify examples of other states using TANF funds for reasons other than its 4 core purposes. One of the things that has enabled the misuse of funds is a lack of guardrails that connect taxpayer dollars to people actually in need. Unlike other federal programs, there are virtually no rules governing how states spend TANF non-assistance funds. There's no eligibility limit to target TANF to families in need. There's no requirement to ensure TANF non-assistance is being used to support work, training, and education activities. In fact, only 8.1% was spent on these activities in 2022. TANF has no spending deadlines, so states are sitting on billions in unspent reserves, reaching $6.4 billion in 2022. How big a problem is it? What is the rate of improper payments? No one knows, because the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services have never reported a rate of improper payment. Together, this lack of federal protections has created the perfect storm for waste, fraud, and abuse. The victims aren't just taxpayers, but also the Americans in dire straits who need help. That's why one of our priorities must be restoring integrity and accountability to TANF. Republicans and Democrats on this committee have both expressed concerns about the ongoing fraud and questionable use of funds in this program, and they've introduced legislation. Some of the Democrat policies are not that far from Republican policies, and the Biden-Harris administration has proposed Republican ideas like reporting improper payments and targeting TANF to families earning less than 200% of the federal poverty line. I believe there is room for bipartisanship, but my priority as chairman is to make sure in our push for reform, we don't turn welfare into a mechanism that traps people in poverty or to lose the ability to tailor programs to the unique needs of local communities and families. Those are important principles of TANF that made it successful in 1996 and should be a foundation that we build on. I want to thank our witnesses for taking the time to be here and sharing their insights. In particular, we are honored to be joined by someone from my congressional district, Mr. Matt Underhile in Stoddard County. He is a living example of what can happen when welfare programs help people find full-time employment that supports a family, and the spillover effects that has for building strong communities right there in Stoddard County. I want to thank you for traveling to Washington from God's country, as we say back home, and I look forward to you sharing your story with us today. We are also joined by someone whose experience, I think, can help shed additional light on the need to pursue reforms to states' ability to spend TANF. Mr. Brett Favre, we look forward to hearing his insights into how weak federal oversight and self-dealing state officials contributed to Mississippi's case. He saw how embezzlement and mismanagement hurt the people whom welfare is supposed to help. We want to thank you for coming here and using your name and platform to draw attention to the need for stronger federal safeguards in TANF spending to ensure what happened in Mississippi doesn't happen again in other places. I'm grateful to each and every one of you for coming to share your perspective on how Congress can reform TANF. We must reclaim these critical welfare dollars and restore the integrity of this important program to focus on removing barriers to work and building the capacity of individuals to realize their full potential and thrive. I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Nill, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here with us this morning. When they are able to receive it, TANF can play an important role in making ends meet each month for families with children across the country. Bridging the gap on affording basic necessities while also helping parents and other caregivers find meaningful work and build a better life is a shared goal. Unfortunately, less than 1 in 4 poor families gets assistance from TANF nationally, and many states offer even smaller benefits. We are reminded that TANF is supposed to be a trampoline. People hit it at a difficult time in their lives, never anticipating perhaps that they would need it, and then they bounce back up. I would note also many of the economic policies that the Democrats on this committee embraced have worked splendidly, including a very arcane part of our economy called labor participation rates, which have gone up. It means that people who can work, want to work, and will work, and that's part of what I hope we will hear in testimony this morning as well. This Congress is ending as it began. The will of the wealthy and the well-connected stands out over our most vulnerable American families. The only TANF legislation we considered in committee was H.R. 6918, which allowed states to divert funds intended for needy families to fund anti-abortion centers. We are just days away from not only a government shutdown, but also the expiration of the TANF program, and the committee is lending our platform to a subject that is often involved in the most dramatic misuse of TANF funds. Let me also say something based on long institutional memory when we talk about the shortcomings of what happened in this Congress. Again, last evening, the Speaker of the House cannot get a rule through a committee that the leadership picked. It's an astounding turn of events. So our CR will be put on the suspension calendar. So today there's going to be a lot of outrage over a program that has been repeatedly exploited with no accountability for how it got that way. Our Republican authors of the original TANF bill saw it deliberately preventing federal oversight of TANF, and it came as the request from House members and governors. In Mississippi, 396,000 families and about 632,000 children accessed our expanded child credit in 2021, whereas at the same time, only 2,000 families accessed TANF. It's stunning. The child credit worked, and I know there is sympathy and understanding on this committee for expanding the child credit. It's still a failure to come to the aid of the poorest among us when it expired. Democrats stand ready to work with Republicans to provide oversight authority and return the misspent funds for poor families that need financial help. In fact, Ranking Member Davis, a lifelong champion of our nation's most vulnerable workers and families, and another champion, Congressman Chu, are leading legislation to replace a Republican provision in the original law that allowed malfeasance in Mississippi to happen with penalties and requiring states to recover misspent funds and direct them to their intended audience, poor children. Another champion on the committee is Congresswoman Moore, who through her lived experience knows better than anyone about holding those in power accountable as we try to help struggling families. We have a clear, proven pathway to help struggling families restore the expanded child credit, guarantee child care, unlock access to paid family and medical leave. Those would be 3 good starts. Today, we are being asked to choose a false dichotomy. I hope that we will understand that the policies that we will hear about today were badly unbalanced. And with that, let me yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Neal. I will now introduce our witnesses. We have Sam Adolphsen, is Policy Director for the Foundation for Government Accountability. We have Brett Favre, is a former pro football player from Summerall, Mississippi. We have Matt Underhile, is a shift supervisor at Stoddard County Sheriff's Office in Bloomfield, Missouri. And we have Jarvis Dortch, is Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Mississippi. I want to thank you all once again for joining us today. Your written statements will be made part of the hearing record, and you each have 5 minutes to deliver remarks. We'll start with Mr. Adolphsen. You may begin when you are ready.
Good morning, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and members of the committee. My name is Sam Adolphsen. I'm the Policy Director at the Foundation for Government Accountability. Before I joined FGA, I oversaw TANF as the Chief Operating Officer of the Maine Department of Health and Human Services. Cash welfare was once broken in this country, and so broken, it led to something pretty extraordinary: successful bipartisan reform. And when President Bill Clinton said it was time to end welfare as we knew it, this body acted and made it happen, at least in this program. And this committee knows the story of that success well: increased incomes, decreased poverty, and less spending. And it clearly understands how important it is to protect that success by acknowledging the remaining problem areas in the program. The program has drifted from the core mission of getting people back to work. And it's clear that stronger guardrails are needed to reverse this trend. Fraud and waste is a problem in the program. Issues like EBT card skimming and selling and theft of TANF funds by administrators in several states continue to plague the program. It's hard to gauge the exact scope of fraud because, as the GAO pointed out this summer, Health and Human Services doesn't measure it. And the few special OIG reports that we do have show rates of improper payments up to 46%. Misallocation is an issue too. The combination of flexibility, carryover funds, and commingling with other funding often leads to, at best, questionable spending. For example, more than 40 states spend TANF on programs with eligibility levels twice the federal poverty line. In Maine, I saw this firsthand when we ultimately reversed some TANF transactions after struggling to get clear answers from the Obama administration on how funds could be used for certain services. And there is blatant misuse as well. Some states are spending billions of TANF dollars as a slush fund to pay for college tuition programs, universal basic income projects, or tax credits in lieu of using state general funds. At least one state isn't shy about publicly calling this a fund swap. These issues need attention. But it isn't just about fraud or misspending or misallocation. It's also about missed opportunities. Missed opportunities to use TANF in the best way possible for work, to fulfill the core program objectives, to help millions more people achieve the American dream. When only 1 out of every $10 is spent on that mission today, we know there is a missed opportunity. When so many states are falling short of meeting work participation rates, we know states aren't doing their best. And when the program spends more on administration than it does on key objectives, we know we can do better. Discussions about caseload size too often center entirely around those receiving a cash benefit. But there are tens of millions of able-bodied adults in welfare programs across the country who could benefit from case management, family supports, and job training, the precise type of programs TANF is meant to fund. It makes sense then to rebalance spending back towards work with additional guardrails, like ensuring a baseline amount is spent on work activities and supports. And the program does need more oversight. A good start would be to reserve funds for those below certain income levels, measure improper payments within the program, just like other welfare programs do, and increase required state accountability for performance and spending. With some reform and a renewed focus, we can make sure that TANF is the premier welfare to work program that it was always meant to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Favre, you are now recognized.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, members of the committee, my name is Brett Favre, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to testify here today. I was born and raised in Mississippi. My parents were school teachers. I played football for Southern Miss and professionally for 20 years and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Since I retired from football, I've engaged in various business enterprises, endorsed products I believe in, and with my wonderful wife, Deanna, helped many charities in my home state and elsewhere. Throughout my career, there were many highs and many lows. Those lows helped me find out who I really am. They taught me to persevere, overcome challenges, and succeed. But the challenges my family and I have faced over the last 3 years because certain government officials in Mississippi failed to protect federal TANF funds from fraud and abuse and are unjustifiably trying to blame me, those challenges have hurt my good name and are worse than anything I faced in football. When this started, I didn't know what TANF was. Now I know TANF is one of the country's most important welfare programs to help people in need. This is a cause dear to my heart and to Deanna's, as we have our own Far for Hope Foundation to help disadvantaged children. In 2020, Mississippi claimed that $77 million in TANF funds had been misspent, resulting in criminal convictions of state officials and people running a nonprofit which had received these funds. This nonprofit had a long-standing partnership with the state and an impeccable reputation. Mississippi also brought a civil lawsuit against numerous individuals, including me. A gag order bars the parties from discussing the specifics of the lawsuit. Instead, I'm here to share what I've now seen up close about how reforms are needed to stop the misspending of TANF funds. Even before I was sued, when I was informed that the nonprofit appeared to have improperly used TANF funds, I returned to the state the funds I had received. Even though I had provided services to the nonprofit, and even though I knew, and I know, I had done nothing wrong, I returned the funds, no questions asked. I had also offered to help raise funds for a new volleyball facility at Southern Miss, yeah, the one that's gotten all the publicity. I wanted to help my alma mater and benefit the community. Southern Miss introduced me to the nonprofit to see if they could help with the funding. I had no way of knowing that there was anything wrong with how the state funded the project, especially since it was publicly approved by many state agencies and multiple attorneys, including the Attorney General. Sadly, I also lost an investment in a company that I believed was developing a breakthrough concussion drug I thought would help others. And I'm sure you'll understand why it's too late for me, because I've recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's. This is also a cause dear to my heart. Recently, the doctor running the company pleaded guilty to taking TANF money for his own use. I believe that I got swept up in a civil lawsuit at the instigation of State Auditor Shad White, an ambitious public official who decided to tarnish my reputation to try to advance his own political career. Even after he applauded me for returning the funds and said there was no evidence that I knew TANF funds were involved. And strangely enough, Shad did not bring the TANF misuse issue to the Department of Justice, but to a local DA, who himself is now under federal and criminal investigation. He has profited from his position as someone with firsthand knowledge of the Mississippi case, but when my lawyers wanted to question him under oath, he swore he had no personal knowledge of the events. I've now sued Shad for defamation in a case upheld by the court. Most recently, the Mississippi Attorney General has even sued Shad for exceeding his powers in going after me. I've also learned that the state, believe it or not, is using TANF funds to pay outside private lawyers, Adam Stone and Katie Pickett of the Jones Walker firm, to sue me and others. Those same lawyers, before they sued me, came to my hometown to try to convince me to retain them in this very dispute. I also understand that those same lawyers 3 years ago never even interviewed witnesses before they sued me and rejected a settlement offer from Southern Miss to resolve this dispute early on through scholarships for TANF qualifying students, a settlement that would have shut off the flow of TANF funds to the lawyers. Importantly, I have learned that nobody was or is watching how TANF funds are spent. Our laws don't sufficiently protect against TANF spending unrelated to helping people out of poverty. States have too much flexibility on how they spend this money, which leads to waste and abuse. We need mechanisms for oversight of TANF spending and greater clarity as to permissible uses of TANF funds. Democrats and Republicans should agree. Rampant state misuse of TANF funds is hurting efforts to help vulnerable families and children. And I was told Ways and Means Committee was working on this problem, so I was willing to speak to you to encourage Congress to reform this important anti-poverty program, and I urge Congress to put TANF guardrails in place to ensure that what happened in Mississippi doesn't happen again. I urge Congress to pass the TANF reforms included in the committee member bills, reforms designed to target funds to those truly most in need, to help low-income American find and keep a job, to limit how states can spend TANF grants and reduce wasteful bureaucracy, and to protect taxpayer funds from fraud and abuse. And in closing, thank you, Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal.
Thank you. Mr. Underhile, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and members of the committee. I am Matt Underhile. I'm a 47-year-old husband to Lita, father of 7 children. I work as a corrections officer at Stoddard County Sheriff's Department and just accepted a position with the FCC Family Counseling Center, and I would like to share my story of how TANF funding has changed my life. As a freshman in high school, I lost both of my parents to cancer, quickly dropped out of school, fell into a life of drugs and violence. I was homeless for about a year, worked inconsistent jobs, construction, and jobs for cash, sold drugs, and had no employment benefits. During this 17 years, I struggled to pay child support payments and support my family. It's not a life I'm proud of. At my rock bottom, I was invited to a graduation for my best friend's son, which I've known since birth. When I showed up, I was so high that he told me that it was best that I leave. That made me start rethinking my life choices. I didn't go to rehab, but I stopped using and stopped running around with the people that were bad influences on me in my life. I met my wife, Lita, married her a year after, and she helped me become a better person and live a life for her that her and I could both be proud of. I found out about the Missouri Excel program on Facebook. My wife and I agreed that I would earn my high school diploma and she would work to support the family. I started class in March of 2019. The Missouri Excel Center helped me restart, and I graduated a year later. I participated in things like Skill Up. They offered me transportation money to help me get back and forth to school because I was driving 60 miles round trip. The Skill Up program and Excel Center offered all kinds of employment-driven opportunities to students. They have classes that teach you how to be a good employee, what employers are looking for, and soft skills like what to wear, how to communicate, how to advocate for yourself. My Skill Up specialist put on a career day where local businesses came to the school, presented to students what employment at their business would look like, what they were looking for in employees, and how to get the job and be a good employee. She designed it to where the students would be able to apply for the position on the spot, interview, get hired to these businesses. She was also active in the community. If a student needed steel-toed shoes, scrubs, or anything like that that would help their employment, Skill Up would purchase these items to help relieve the burden of expense and work to go to training. While at the Excel Center, I also participated in Coffee Club put together by the school and Skill Up, where graduates would get together and discuss what was going on in their lives and provide support and encouragement and networking after you graduated. You're always encouraged to go back. If life gets too hard, you need to talk to somebody. They're there for you. If you have trouble finding a job, they'll help you. Skill Up helped me figure out how to dig myself out of a hole when I went to register for FAFSA for college, I found out that I had not registered for selective service because I was homeless at the time. And my skill up specialist found a way and helped me write a letter explaining my circumstances, and they approved for me to receive FAFSA funds to go to college. I then got a job as corrections officer, where I'm now working. I also work with a local drug court doing UAs for the males, and I've discovered through this journey that I enjoy helping others, and I have learned through Skill Up and the Excel Center that there is always ways to remove any barrier you may have, that there are people, programs that can take care of you and help you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dortch.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. Through my statement, I hope to relay 3 points to the committee. First, the state of Mississippi took advantage of lax federal guidelines to make it nearly impossible for poor families to receive help, leaving millions in welfare funds to be wasted or stolen. Second, after the largest embezzlement scandal in state history, little in Mississippi has changed. Third, Mississippi families can only look to Congress to reform the system. Whatever those reforms may be, know that Mississippi is not an example of what works. Beginning in 2016, while a member of the Mississippi legislature, I talked with several advocates and constituents concerned with the lack of transparency within the agency that administers TANF, the Mississippi Department of Human Services, MDHS. I also quickly learned that being a legislator did not entitle me to useful information from MDHS. However, there were a few things that we did know. We knew MDHS rejected nearly every applicant for cash assistance. In 2012, the state's TANF approval rate dropped from 35% to 2.8%. In April of 2021, in the middle of COVID, the entire adult caseload reached its lowest mark, just 140 individuals. We knew MDHS refused to spend welfare funds, yearly foregoing between 30 and 40% of its TANF grant. We also knew that MDHS outsourced its TANF program to a nonprofit director named Nancy New. New received over $50 million to operate her Families First for Mississippi initiative. In May of 2019, I wrote a letter received by the Federal Department of Health and Human Services stating, quote, neither MDHS or Families First has provided the public with the program's budget priorities or deliverables and outcomes, end quote. HHS responded that Mississippi's TANF expenditures were allowed and further scrutiny was unnecessary. However, a few months later, New and the former MDHS director were arrested and have since pleaded guilty to misspending welfare funds. Following the arrest, we finally learned in detail how Mississippi spent welfare dollars. This isn't an exhaustive list, but millions were paid for cars, vacations, and real estate. Over $2 million went to a professional wrestler, aptly nicknamed the $1 Million Man. $9,500 a month paid the mortgage on a horse ranch owned by a former professional football player. And we really love our football in Mississippi, so the state paid another professional football player over $1 million to compensate him for appearance fees, promotions, and autographs. Nearly 5 years later, little has changed. Lawmakers have passed zero bills addressing the scandal. In fact, there have been zero hearings in the Mississippi legislature on TANF. Ignoring the embezzlement of millions of dollars, lawmakers went after TANF recipients who receive at most $170 a month. Just weeks after the arrest, the legislature passed a bill allowing the state to audit the tax returns of the families that receive TANF and other public benefits. So of course, the cash assistance denial rate remains above 90%, reaching just 0.06% of impoverished Mississippi adults. Mississippi continues hoarding TANF money with $145 million in unallocated funds. Sub-grantees still receive awards up to $35 million a year. Despite MDHS tasking these grantees with providing workforce training, school programs, and mentorship, the current MDHS director has stated that his agency does not track the outcomes of these funded programs. When a legislator asked for sub-grantee performance data, the director stated, quote, you're asking me for information that doesn't exist, end quote. Mr. Chairman, I applaud you and your committee's commitment to ensuring TANF helps the people that need it. But please remember that many of Mississippi's former and current spending decisions are allowed because of TANF's weak federal guidelines. That must change. Congressman Danny Davis, Mississippi Congressman Benny Thompson, and others on this committee have proposed legislation to penalize states that misspend TANF funds and require those states to allocate more funding towards cash assistance. That legislation would have forced Mississippi to make real change to its TANF program. Most importantly, Congress must assure that individuals and families in need have the cash resources to survive. The expanded child tax credit cut in half the number of Mississippi's Black children living in poverty. Last summer, members of the Work and Welfare Subcommittee learned of the success of the Magnolia Mothers Trust, a program that provides $1,000 a month to moms in poverty without restrictions. These programs are clear evidence that direct cash assistance, absent Mississippi's paternalistic red tape, can effectively lift families out of poverty. Mr. Chairman, when the committee considers reforms to TANF, please ask this question. Would this policy change or prevent what has and what continues to happen in Mississippi? Again, thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you all for your testimony. We'll start with the questions and answers portion. Mr. Favre, when we previously spoke, you said something that really stuck out to me. You said before all of this, you didn't know what TANF money was. And it's quite interesting. Right before this hearing, I was with a group of lawmakers, and they asked, why is Brett Favre testifying before your committee today? And I said to talk about TANF and the abuses in TANF. And that member of Congress asked me, what is TANF? That member of Congress, what is TANF? And I had to explain, it was a welfare program that was created in 1996. And so I imagine that 99% of Americans don't know what TANF is. And for them, that statement would ring very true. And so as this committee considers reforms to the program, can you tell us when you first learned what TANF was, and since going through all of this, the concerns you have about the program as it exists today?
Yes. April, maybe May of 2020, I was actually on the golf course with my brother and 3 other friends, and our phones started going crazy, and people were asking about Shad White, who I had no idea who Shad White was, and said, "What'd you do to him? He's saying, that you are involved in TANF money," and I had no idea what TANF was, had never heard of it, and was completely caught off guard by this press conference. And if not knowing what TANF was, and later finding out that it is welfare money, I returned the money ASAP, no questions asked. And no one from Shad White's office ever came to me prior to this press conference that he held and asked me any details or specifics in regards to my involvement. So we filed a defamation lawsuit against Shad White, and in that lawsuit, his top chief auditor, in her deposition most recently, said that the truth, finding out the truth, was quite frankly, was not important. She just wanted to close out her audit. So she didn't do any, it's unbelievable, but that's when I found out, was 2020.
The concerns you have about the program, what are those concerns today?
Well, I'm here because there's obviously a problem. First and foremost, I think a big problem is a lot of people don't know what TANF is, never heard of it. So we have to educate people on what TANF is, but we have to implement guardrails and guidelines and be strict on how the money is supposed to be used for a lot of reasons. Most importantly, so those families can get the money that they need in situations like myself, or people are in similar situations who are trying to do good and are caught up in quite frankly, a mess. This doesn't happen to them. So, I think we need to educate people first and foremost and teach people what TANF is. But the guidelines are very vague, as I understand it. And so how they're used, the TANF funds, you can kind of stretch that.
So non-assistance of TANF funds represents nearly 80% of all of the TANF program's spending, a substantial portion of any government program to operate largely outside of any serious guardrails. Mr. Favre, you have previously shared with me your concern that there seemed to be no one doing much of anything to establish the guardrails on TANF spending. This committee is paying attention. We're holding hearings, we're asking questions of federal agencies and looking at what can be done legislatively to put those guardrails in place. From your experience, where do you see the most maybe glaring of oversight at the state or federal level that allows these welfare funds to be spent in ways that's not helping needy people?
Well, I lived it. So the auditor, this was all under his watch, this 77 to 100 million allegedly that is misspent, stolen, misappropriated. But he chose not to audit. He didn't act until his governor, Governor Phil Bryant, became the whistleblower. So it's got to start at the heart of it before it starts anywhere else. And the auditor, his job is to audit that TANF money.
Thank you. Mr. Underhile, your story speaks to some of the work this committee is trying to do to support more individuals overcome adversity and challenging circumstances. And for example, Representative Smucker and Winstrup, they have a bill that allows states to transfer up to 30% of TANF to the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act to support workforce development activities targeted toward individuals in poverty. Based on your experience with a program in Missouri that provides similar type services, what would it do for individuals and families and communities across this country were we to give states the opportunity to channel more of their efforts and their TANF non-assistant funds towards proven solutions that help Americans enter into the workforce?
It would be absolutely life-changing, because if you don't teach somebody how to work and how to support themselves, giving them money year after year, month after month, isn't going to do anything for them. You're going to hold them where they're at. If you don't teach them anything, they're not growing.
Thank you. It's a privilege and it's an honor of the people in Southeast Missouri that you're here to share your story. So thank you for being up here. I now recognize the ranking member for any questions he might have.
Thank you, Chairman. So the chairman said in his commentary that he spoke to a member of Congress who didn't know what TANF is. Didn't know what TANF is? It's one of the most important social service support systems that existed in its antecedents from the New Deal. That's how long this goes back. What's important to acknowledge as well, I know something about the TANF legislation from the 1996 Welfare Reform Act and what happened, the compromises that were reached. Republicans insisted on an end to the entitlement of welfare. And Democrats in the minority in the House, but with a Democratic president, we wanted more child care, more job training, more transportation assistance, and the compromise was reached in a very divided Congress. But Mr. Underhile, your testimony today is an indication of why all members of Congress ought to know something about TANF. Based upon the trampoline effect that I described at the beginning, you were able to remake your history with a partnership between the federal government and the state governments who administer TANF. That was part of the Reform Act of 1996. And specifically to Mr. Dortch, you've spent all of these years fighting to direct public dollars to struggling families who fall on hard times, oftentimes because of bad luck and bad choices, but not to miss the relevance of why TANF is important. You have been an advocate for all of these years. You've been positioned to question inappropriate spending, and now you are part of a group that says, we want that money spent on people who need it, and the money that was intended for that purpose. The state now is largely responsible for the administration of TANF fundings, as we moved it away from the entitlement program here in Washington in '96. So advocating for an expanded child tax credit, child care, paid family and medical leave, these are policies that actually have been proven to lift families out of poverty. The child credit alone that we inserted into the rescue package, it cut childhood poverty in America in half. In half. So let me give you a chance, Mr. Dortch, to talk about the success of those initiatives as you've described them in your testimony.
Sure. As you mentioned, it cut poverty in half in our state, especially childhood poverty when you consider black families. You have to remember that Mississippi is a state that pretty much relies on jobs that are service jobs with low wages. So people don't have a consistent amount of money that they know is coming in because there's not industry everywhere in the state. What the child tax credit did was put more money into the economy. It allowed families to be able to spend on groceries, on necessities, be able to buy things for their children. This money went back into the economy. It just didn't stay with that family. So this doesn't just benefit an individual or family that is in need. It helps the entire state. Mississippi saw record tax revenue during this period. We saw record income growth during this period. It wasn't because of any changes in state policy. It was because more people had money, disposable cash that they could spend on things. And that, in Mississippi, that's far too often people don't have cash to do that. They don't have the means to be able to buy something extra for their family. Instead, they're very proudful people that always talk about how they can make things stretch. And we're so proud of being able to do that in Mississippi, we forget that we're not getting what we're supposed to be getting in our state. People are proud that they can make things stretch, make payments stretch, make food stretch. You know, we overcome this and we're proud of it, but it shouldn't be that way.
Thank you. And just a lesson here, I don't want to litigate the case that Mr. Favre has alluded to, but I do think that based upon the experience that all have had as witnesses here, that you might want to consider using this opportunity to make real investments in childhood poverty. It's a stubborn part of American history. Child care, paid leave, child credit, help us all lift children out of poverty.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Mr. Smith is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our entire panel here, and certainly to my colleagues. Many of us have been working on this issue for some time. I really appreciate the efforts that so many are making. I don't want to just say have made, but are making because of the importance of this issue. I know that the GAO has released a preliminary observation finding 155 unresolved TANF audit findings spanning 35 states in 2023 alone, most of which were found to be severe and outstanding. I would like to submit this for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. When we talk about temporary assistance for needy families, I like to point out to anyone who will listen that these funds are intended for the neediest among us, and that we want to make a difference. That these taxpayer dollars that come from all over the country, obviously, are intended to help lift people out of poverty. So when I hear and read about various things, I'm concerned. I think Mr. Dortch, you mentioned, I think it was your comments that included that someone said that we don't track the outcomes. That's tragic in and of itself. I think it's important that the federal government not become overly prescriptive of various state governments, but we need to have the expectation that positive things are happening. And I realize that we want to encourage creativity among the states, but wow, the creativity that we've seen, whether it's in Mississippi or elsewhere, like I said, there are many states that have gotten, I think, a little too clever. But the efforts to cap benefits, beneficiaries, I should say, at 200% of federal poverty and below. I know the administration is looking at creating a rule as such. I've been working on this legislatively for some time, and I would certainly invite colleagues to join in this effort, because I think it really helps. It's not the full answer, but it helps target the funds to folks who need it the most. But Mr. Favre, I have a few questions here. When you were initially approached at helping promote various efforts, how was it characterized that these funds, where was it characterized these funds were coming from?
My understanding was it was grants that this particular lady had been writing grants for 35 years in the state. And the university introduced me to her and her nonprofit. And surprisingly, she was actually a Southern Miss grad and was on the athletic board, but I'd never met her before. Again, as I said earlier, never was TANF or welfare funds mentioned in any conversation.
Were public funds mentioned? Or was it your understanding that they were private funds from a wealthy individual or some source?
I don't recall. I just remember that grant money.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, I think that your presence here today is helpful so that we can work together to prevent similar situations from happening. But I am just extremely concerned that the lack of expectations that currently exist, that these taxpayer dollars intended for the neediest among us are not helping the people that they are intended to help. Mr. Adolphsen, could you speak a little bit to how maybe limiting the beneficiaries to 200% of federal poverty and below could help us in our effort?
Sure, Representative, thank you for the question. And just to go back to your last question, you know, one of the issues with TANF is that there's state-required maintenance of effort, MOE, that in 1996, Congress said, hey, we're going to give you this block grant, but you're also going to have to keep spending money on the truly needy. We're going to make sure you keep helping. Well, right now, MOE can also be accrued at the state level through non-government spending, through some private nonprofits, which is another, it's just a confusing, unclear and unnecessary way to do that MOE process. So I just wanted to mention that lack of transparency on that front and kind of undermines what the MOE does. I think keeping eligibility for non-cash assistance side to under some threshold, if 200% of federal poverty That's a good benchmark, but you look at the food stamp program, it's 185% is often the upper limit. Medicaid is 133% of the federal poverty level. So anything in that range would make sure that those funds that are outside of cash loaded onto an EBT card, anything that's funding a program, a service, another part of government is going to the poorest, those in poverty in the state, I think would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having the hearing, and thank you to all the witnesses. I really want to shout out to Mr. Underhill. Thank you for coming, and congratulations on the success that you've experienced, and thank you for acknowledging the fact that it was the help that you got that got you back on your feet. I appreciate that very much. And hopefully today isn't an exercise in yelling fire, but doing nothing to put it out. Mr. Neal talked about the history of the 1996 federal legislation that brought us to where we are today. I wasn't here when that was done, but I was in the California State Senate, and I wrote the California Welfare Reform Act that was necessitated by the 1996 federal legislation. And I know that what we did in California was helpful. There are many Mr. Underhills in California as a result of that work. And I think we should be focusing on how we bring about more success. I believe that we should be holding a markup on policies to bring families out of poverty, like reauthorizing TANF with increased oversight, the enhanced child tax credit, which we've heard from a couple of people today, actually cut childhood poverty in half, something that is important in every state across the nation, and the earned income tax credit. However, there's been little in the work done to do this working together that we should be doing. This seems to be like typical playbook stuff, creating a problem and then talking about how we fix it. We've just seen this most recently in regard to the SALT discussions that are taking place in this presidential election. So we need to be coming together, and Democrats are willing to work with our Republican colleagues to strengthen TANF and provide the necessary safeguards that will prevent misuse. We should be doing it throughout the entire session, not with 2 days left in the legislative session. This is a program that is important enough that we should be devoting ample time to making it as great as it can be. Mr. Dortch, I have a question for you. If Republicans choose to work with Democrats to reauthorize TANF, what can we do to ensure that the federal government has adequate oversight of how states use these dollars?
Sure. There has to be some mechanism to allow the federal government to punish these states. Mississippi did this 5 years ago, and nothing has happened. There haven't been any penalties that have come down for this misspending. The state legislature has shown no interest in doing anything about it. As I mentioned about the rules as far as, or any rules on looking into how these programs work, that's the current MDHS director. Even after all of the scandal, they're giving out grants to organizations and not asking them to show what it's going to.
If I could interrupt you, I recognize that, and in your statement, you've explained that well, and that's all part of the fact that we've block granted these programs, sent them back to the states, and said, do what you want to do to respond to this very real and very important issue that we all want to address. So my question is, what can Congress do to ensure that the states take that block grant and do what they're supposed to do with it?
Yeah, I think one thing you could definitely do is to stop states from being able to manipulate these broad spending categories. There needs to be tighter rules on what is actually going out. If we're doing job assistance, what does that look like? If you're helping people get transportation services, what does that look like? That's information that we can't find out from our Department of Health and Human Services. So when they use these big, the broad terms or broad categories, they've even put scholarships to folks that are making up to 350% of poverty level under the term of workforce development. And that was the bulk of that money. So you don't even really know what that money is going towards because the categories are so broad.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Underhile, I'm really impressed with what you were able to do. In our family, we have the situation very much like that, and it's been since my son was 14 years old. He's now 42 years old. Program after program after program after program. How were you able to get through all that? Because I think that, look, when the rate of recidivism is like 97%, so you come out of that deal, and I have people tell me all the time, and we have a family business. They say, well, what you need to do, you need to hire those folks. I say, that's fine. There's a little thing called liability that makes it impossible to do that. What you've done is incredible. You were able to turn your life around. So I've got to think between you and your wife, all of a sudden you have this awakening and this idea that there's more to life than what I'm doing now. I'm wasting whatever the Lord's given me. I need to make the most out of it. But what you're doing is you're working within the system itself. It's getting into the private sector that's really difficult. And so for all of you, I mean, all of these programs start out well-intended. Mr. Favre, what you've gone through is incredible because you don't know what you don't know, and because it's so broad and there's so few guardrails on it, Mr. Dortch, I listened to you, and so who would a person go to find out, am I working within the framework of this? Am I working towards a desired outcome of this? And listen, we have to do these things. There's no question about that. The question on it is, what is the return on that taxpayer dollar to the country? And Mr. Dortch, Mr. Underhile, I'm telling you, you've done an amazing job. You've done an amazing job. But again, I get back to that liability thing, and I've been trying to work with one of our colleagues across the aisle because she has a problem with her son. If we can't find a way to take the curse off of employing somebody, I think it's foolish to tell somebody, listen, you just have to get up, get going, get yourself a job, and get out there and work every day. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to do. Mr. Favre, you're doing what you thought was right, and you're penalized because you were doing something you thought was right, but somebody said, no, but that's outside the bounds. And say, really, where's the rule book? Tell me. Mr. Dortch, you work with it every day. It's not the amount of money we spend, it's the amount of money we waste. And I just can't understand how we can have a program this big, so well-intended and structured, but not enough guardrails on it to tell people, hey, this is where you have to stay within. I've watched too many programs like that. It's not the American people don't want to invest. It's the trouble is with the money that gets invested gets used differently, and a lot of it is because nobody guides you, nobody counsels you along the way. So I appreciate you all being here. I can't imagine what it's like to go through. I do know what you're going through, Mr. Underhile. I do know what you're going through because I've watched it now for 28 years and keep thinking that maybe the next time, maybe the next time, maybe the next time. So way to stick to it, way to get with it. Your wife must be an incredible person. And you have, what, 7 children?
Yes, all together.
Good Lord. We only have 5, and I don't know how we afford that. So listen, thank you for what you're doing, Mr. Dortch. If you could keep us in line and let us know what it is that we need to do. What is it that we're not doing? It's not a matter of not allocating money. It's putting into place what it should be used for and counseling people and saying, well, no, this is not intended to be this way. But once it goes to the state, it's in their hands. So I want to thank you all for being here. Mr. Favre, for you to step out of where we've been your whole life, people start to understand this can happen to anybody. If it can happen to Brett Favre, it can happen to anybody. And this is where we like to think that somehow that the system's fair. I would like to think it is. but there's too many times to look at where it's not, and it's a lot of because of a misconception. But thank you all again for being here. Mr. Adolphsen, thank you for being here today. This is a huge opportunity for the United States to get itself back on keel, right? So thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, before I begin, I'd like to yield time to Mr. Neal.
Mr. Chairman, I have a series of letters that have come from Congressman Benny Thompson of Mississippi that he would like to have inserted into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Yield back.
Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Neal, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank to all of our witnesses for your testimony to an incredibly important program, TANF, and especially given its goals and focus. And clearly, there's a need for reform, and I want to make sure that we point out as well and thank Representative Danny Davis, Representative Graham Moore, Judy Chu, Representative Dwight Evans, and Jimmy Gomez for putting together the TANF State Expenditure and Integrity Act. I think that will go a long way towards helping. And certainly, child poverty is an issue all across the country of ours. And anytime there's fraud or abuse in a program, it ought to be investigated, and we ought to make sure that we're eliminating that. We shouldn't tolerate any kind of crime to federal dollars that are flowing to our states. There is, however, sometimes another crime of neglect. And this committee is, and the United States Congress is very much responsible for that. You imagine, Mr. Dortch, that the last time that Social Security was enhanced, Richard Nixon was president of the United States. You're talking about a state that desperately needs help and where 58,000 children are impacted, and yet Congress has not voted to enhance benefits to Social Security recipients. And I'm sure some of the goals here are well-intended, but how can we convene as a body year after year and bring up subject matter after subject matter and not acknowledge the most effective and efficient governmental program that we have, administered for approximately 1%. I'm from an insurance capital of the world. They administer insurance anywhere from between 16 to 26%. But here's the federal government with the #1 anti-poverty program for the elderly and also for children that has not enhanced the program in more than 50 years. Mr. Favre, don't you think that that's pretty incredulous?
I do.
Mr. Dortch, how about you? Do you think that's pretty incredulous?
I agree.
Isn't it long overdue that when we talk about fraud and abuse and waste, that what we need to do is take a look at the programs that are working and understand that government has not stepped up. And this isn't anything that the executive could do or that the Supreme Court is going to do. Only the United States Congress can make sure that we step up. We have 70 million Social Security recipients. 10,000 baby boomers a day become eligible. This is the committee that is responsible for it, and it's long overdue that we take a vote. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Schweikert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I care a lot about this issue, and I want to see if I can actually do something a little more complex, because I really think this could be one of the few things here where if we would learn some way to talk to the left and the right, but I believe the conversation's much bigger than TANF. There's very good economic data now. In America, you know, if you're born poor, it's much more devastating than the race you're born or who your parents want to cuddle with or anything else. It's poverty is the thing that crushes an individual's future. We've had a fixation, at least out of my office also, in the components of health. We have some data that shows that one of the primary drivers in income inequality is actually when you have family members that are quite unhealthy, diabetes, other issues with that. And when we've normalized for that, it's been amazing how income stability comes back in. Sam, I don't want to mispronounce your name. It's say it for me.
Adolphsen.
Adolphsen. I should have gotten that. So if I came to you and said, all right, clean slate, we want to help our brothers and sisters in America, let's say 200% and below poverty line. And we were able to reach out and say every program. Now remember, I just set off the alarm bells of thousands of lobbyists around the country who just lost their minds. But everything what we do in our Medicaid systems, to TANFs, to nutrition support, to even the way we deliver WIC, to the modern equivalent of EBT cards, and said, okay, first off, that's 12,000 per person. So a family of three, which is a typical TANF family, let's call it 35,000. Make the math simple. If we were to rethink, because we have this amazing technology and other things, it's not the 1950s, not the 1960s, 70s anymore. How can we help our brothers and sisters be less poor? And also, Mr. Chairman, for the record, I'd like to submit some articles and a University of Chicago study that talks about relationship to work at the end of 10 years is the single most powerful thing in changing poverty, not necessarily, the transfer payments.
Without objection.
What would you do?
Thank you, Representative. So it really central to the whole thing is what's central to TANF and its work. If you look at one of the leading predictors of whether someone in recovery will relapse in substance abuse, it's whether or not they have a job. If you look at rates of depression, they're much, much higher among those who are unemployed. Work is really central to the well-being and ultimately the health of the individual. And TANF has recognized that since 1996. That's why a big part of why the core objectives revolve around work. And so what I would do first, particularly as it relates to TANF, is take this incredible resource, which is these available TANF funds that you have right now, that states have right now, and I would put those to work in other welfare programs.
But would you, okay, so you would, in your mind, you would use actually sort of the TANF model, which we already are having the conversation of, we have bad actors who have been sending the money in ways that are not helping the poor. And would you consider a universal rethinking and consolidation because there's dozens of different silos we've created over the years thinking we're being helpful?
Sure, and I think there's an even simpler answer, which is just take the two largest programs, welfare programs by participants are the SNAP program, food stamps, and Medicaid. And in Medicaid, there are nearly 40 million able-bodied adults, many with kids in the house. under 133% of federal poverty limit. Same in the food stamp program. There's 10 million able-bodied parents on food stamps. Those folks are not on our TANF caseloads in the states. They come into the office, and if they're eligible, they walk away with a plastic card for food stamps or for Medicaid, and we say, good luck. TANF was designed to say, we're going to give you some cash, some help, but we're also going to help you. We're going to engage with you. And if we did that for those millions of folks in those other programs, even using TANF funds, I think we could close the gap.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, would love to have a much more universal discussion because I also would love us to have also the discussion of transfer payments, welfare, and health. And with that, yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Blumenauer?
Thank you. Well, I think this is a worthy area for more analysis and discussion. I appreciated our ranking member sort of laying out some of this. 50 years ago, as a college student, I participated in a national debate competition, and the subject then was a guaranteed annual income. And we were quoting the Nixon administration, Milton Friedman, being able to deal with some of the complexities here. People cheat because the complex systems allow it. Nobody fully understands these things. There are opportunities for people to game the system. People are poor because they don't have money. Mr. Larson is like a laser on the Social Security program. That works. Section 8 housing vouchers are not in sufficient demand any state in the union. And that's a very efficient way to use the private sector to provide housing. SNAP benefits and WIC, providing food for people. We get all caught up, and I think we forget a little bit about how bad it was 4 years ago in the midst of the pandemic, where we had all sorts of people contacting our office because programs didn't work, they broke down. Part of the problem is the complexity. We have managers managing eligibility here, managers overseeing other managers, guardrails. I mean, most Americans, we found with the child tax credit, the money went where it was needed. It reduced child poverty. Outcomes were improved. And we didn't have to have a bunch of people dealing with the complexity of administering it. I would hope, I'm on my way out, 100 days from now, you're on your own. But I really hope that if we're going to have some serious conversations about this, look at what works. Section 8, Social Security, the child tax credit. We don't have to have endless bureaucracies, hopeless complexity that people can maneuver around and cheat. Cut to the chase, invest in things that work, get benefits to people who need it, and get rid of the bureaucracy that everybody claims that they're against. And we have programs that we can invest in that will do a far better job. I appreciate the witnesses giving us a sense of some of the challenges they face, but I truly think that we ought to trust the American people to be able to invest in things that matter to them. Have special programs, by all means, for people who have special disabilities, or they're dealing with addiction and whatnot. But the vast majority of people don't need that. They need money, they need housing, they need food, and everybody would be better off if we invested more in those basics. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. LaHood.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today, for your valuable testimony and the opportunity to address this subject. And I have to say, Mr. Favre, welcome. As a long-suffering Chicago Bears fan, it's tough to see you here today, but there were many years where I was jealous of your success. But you had a wonderful playing career and well deserving of the Hall of Fame designation. I think Brad Schneider probably shares my pain as being a Chicago Bears fan. Oh, look at that. He's got his Bears jersey. There you go, Brad. Yeah, we don't forget that easily. I'm the chair of our subcommittee on work and welfare, and I have to tell you, I'm thrilled to look around this room today and see all the people that are here today to talk about TANF. And last July, our subcommittee held a hearing investigating this same topic, TANF non-assistance and misuse of funds. And on that day, we had maybe 30 people in the room. So as I look around this room here today, this issue is finally getting the attention it deserves. And I want to thank the chairman for prioritizing it. What we learned at our subcommittee hearing last year was that TANF non-assistance spending lacks basic financial safeguards that are included in most other federal programs, making it easy for states to divert funds and increasing the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse. Understanding what went wrong in Mississippi is important, but I hope people remember that this is an issue across the country. And what happened in that state is a symptom of the larger problem that requires congressional action to fix it. And I think it's also important to remember the title of today's hearing, Reforming TANF, States' Misuse of Welfare Dollars Leaves Poor Families Behind. And today is a culmination of 2 years' worth of work that we've done on our subcommittee on work and welfare. And we have a chart that's behind me here, and this chart provides a timeline and demonstrates the work that our committee has done on TANF. And I want to go through this just to show what led up to the hearing today. In March 2023, our subcommittee on work and welfare held our first hearing examining work requirements in TANF and the need for reforms to strengthen basic assistance. As a result of that hearing, in May of 2023, we passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which included reforms to strengthen TANF and close loopholes to reinforce work requirements. In June 2023, we turned our attention to the non-assistance side of TANF and sent a letter to HHS requesting information on the agency's oversight efforts. In July of 2023, we held our second hearing on TANF. This hearing focused on reclaiming TANF non-assistance to improve accountability and support work. In September of 2023, Chairman Smith and I requested GAO to do a nationwide investigation of TANF non-assistance spending, and they have provided a preliminary report of their findings for this hearing today. And in March, Republican committee members introduced 7 new pieces of legislation to reform TANF non-assistance using what we learned from our investigation. We have done the work and understand what needs to be done. I know this is something that both sides of the aisle care deeply about. My friend Ms. Moore from Wisconsin has shared her concern about questionable uses of TANF funds in Wisconsin. Ms. Sewell suggested at our Work and Welfare Subcommittee putting together a bipartisan working group during one of our hearings, which is a great suggestion. Earlier this year, Secretary Becerra came before this committee and confirmed his commitment to work with us on increased accountability and eliminating fraud in the TANF program. And I echo the chairman and hope this hearing provides an opening to start a meaningful bipartisan conversations to implement the proper safeguards, strengthen the program, and ultimately help more individuals and families. Question for you, Mr. Underhile. Based on your experience, can you describe how getting a full-time job with benefits can transform a person's life rather than just getting a welfare check? What does your job mean to you and your family?
It means everything, because if you're homeless, I give you $100, you spend that $100, you're still homeless. If I don't teach you how to make money and benefit yourself and feed your family and support your family, we're purging money to people that don't care about bettering themselves, in my opinion. If you don't teach somebody how to make money and how to get a job and keep a job and support their family, what are we giving them money for?
Thank you, sir. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of the witnesses who have come and share serious information with us. To begin, I want to applaud the leadership of my friend and colleague, Representative Benny Thompson from Mississippi, who has fought for years to get federal and state officials to investigate the misuse of TANF in Mississippi. As ranking member of the subcommittee with jurisdiction over TANF, I am acutely aware of misuse of millions of dollars from struggling families in Mississippi. But TANF is working exactly as the Republican TANF system was designed. Unlike any other law, Republicans insisted on a statutory prohibition on federal oversight that limits transparency, fraud detection, and enforcement. When Mr. Dortch and other Mississippi advocates asked this subcommittee for help years ago to get the Trump administration to investigate Mississippi's TANF use, we had to direct them to state officials due to this prohibition on enforcement. Even the new GAO report says Health and Human Services has indicated its oversight of state use of TANF funds is constrained by its limited statutory authority. They don't have the authority to do it. Yet, Republican bills to address TANF fraud focused on use by individuals, willfully ignoring the fraud by organizations. Mr. Dortch, I thank you for your tireless work on behalf of families in Mississippi. In 2021, over 350,000 Mississippi families received the enhanced child tax credit, which my Republican colleagues ended in 2022. Yet only about 2,000 families received cash assistance from Mississippi's TANF program, with the paltry sum of about $170 in cash a month for a typical family. I believe the state and the people who diverted funds from needy families have a moral obligation to now help those families. So, Mr. Dortch, is Mississippi giving any of the recovered funds to people in need of, to help with food, housing, child care, and other basic needs? Are the people who misused money intended for poor families doing anything to make up for their actions by helping those struggling families? I lead a bill to allow HHS to monitor states for this kind of malfeasance, and if they find misuse, to require states to recover and invest that money in income support for struggling families. Do you think that kind of policy would help Mississippi? And even after this misuse, has the state of Mississippi been transparent to you and other advocates about how TANF contractors use TANF funds accountably? Mr. Chairman, I also ask unanimous consent to submit additional materials from Representative Benny Thompson to the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Dortch, would you respond?
Sure. The easy answer is no. The state hasn't made any policy changes. We still fail to reach the vast, vast majority of families in need. We haven't put more money towards assisting folks or making sure that money gets to people that need it. Our state director of our TANF program actually said that it's hard for people to access my program, and he's the state director. So he knows the state has constructed so many different rules, and so many different hoops that it's impossible for families to be able to access this program. And also, when they try to access this program, if they make a mistake, they could lose their SNAP benefits or other benefits. we have intentionally made it too complicated, and it's so complicated that people cannot get the benefits. And the thing is, we know what people need. We just got to trust them. I know that that's not going to be, always the case that people do the right thing, but I think the vast majority of Mississippians that are in need are good people that need some extra cash, that need help with transportation, that need childcare. Those are things that we should be able to easily supply folks. Instead, we make up these different rules, and these different nonprofits get organizations. Families First was treated as a great program while it was running. The governor bragged about it. He had awards about it. We said we're changing how Mississippi looks at poverty. We're going to change generational poverty in Mississippi. They weren't doing anything, and we were spending $50 million on it. When people just need those they have basic needs, like childcare, like transportation, like being able to buy groceries. One other thing, Mississippi makes folks do job searches before they can get TANF. So if you're living in a county without any jobs, and there are many counties in Mississippi without any jobs, and you want TANF assistance to help you get transportation, you cannot get that assistance until you go do the job search. So we have really gone way too far in making this complicated and punitive towards people that need the assistance.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. And I also have a submission from press articles that I'd like to submit.
Without objection. Mr. Winster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Poverty is said to exist when people lack the means to satisfy their own basic needs. That is the circumstance of every child ever born. So in reality, no one is really out of poverty until they can function independently to satisfy their own basic needs. And no child can truly be lifted out of poverty, but families can. Mr. Underhile is an example of that. And I thank you for the words that you shared with Mr. LaHood. It was spot on. If you're permanently depending on assistance, you are technically not out of poverty. That's what you were saying. And that's an important point for everyone here in Congress to understand when they say we lifted someone out of poverty. No, you did not. Work can lift you out of poverty. We can feed you, educate you, train you, and get you on a path to independence and freedom and truly out of poverty so that you can feed yourself, house yourself, and teach others, which is what you are doing, Mr. Underhile, and you're a great example. You not only teach others, you teach your children. We have in our district some federally qualified health centers which treats the poorest of the poor, and God bless them for doing it. What we have seen is some of them have associated themselves with food banks. So when you do go to the doctor and try and stay healthy, you can leave with some food that's good for you. I also suggest that our food banks, we post job opportunities, because that's really the outcome we're after. That's what success should look like. Not just saying we sent people money. That's short term. That's short term. And too often, the benefits we do offer have cliffs that when you start to make it, you're worse off. That's a problem. But outcomes matter. And I'm proud to lead the Reduce Duplication and Improve Access to Work Act with my colleague, Representative Smucker, because this legislation would address the silos we see in federal programs by allowing states the flexibility to braid TANF and WIOA funds together, WIOA meaning the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. That's the final step in the process of truly lifting people out of poverty. I know we touched on it today. I believe that where we've touched on allowing states to transfer some TANF funding to WIOA, braid these funding streams together, which can improve these programs and actually give you the outcome that we want to see for all people. In my home state of Ohio, we've had our own examples of a TANF billing fraud scheme, unfortunately. In fact, according to the GAO submission for the record for this hearing, employees of a TANF subrecipient in Ohio submitted inflated payroll expenses and misspent funds on real estate, resort vacations, and cosmetic surgery. Mr. Chairman, with no objection, I would like to submit an article detailing this story for the record.
Without objection.
In Ohio, we are fortunate that the courts identified this fraud and took care of it. Mr. Favre, thank you for being here. Admired your career. I'm from Cincinnati. You didn't get to beat up on us too much, but other people did, so, you know, we've seen some change. But anyway, I'm going to ask you, how do you think policymakers can act now to protect TANF funds so we don't have to continue chasing fraud after it has already occurred?
Again, I can only speak in my experiences, but I look at something that's happening presently. The attorneys that the state has hired to represent them against myself and others, unbelievably, is being paid with TANF funds as we speak. And I mean, if that's got to stop. You know, I mean, this has been a 3 or 4 year saga for me in the state of Mississippi. And as much attention has been garnered our way, you would think that we would have this resolved by now. But yet, here we are. And I'm not smart enough to figure out what needs to be done in a lot of areas of TANF, but I know the senseless use of TANF funds for things that they're not intended for has to stop.
I think we need a few more people with a conscience. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yield back.
Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We sit in this hearing today to address a critical problem with public assistance in this country, a problem that's been exacerbated by one of our witnesses here today who is facing allegations of misusing TANF funds for corporate gain. Mr. Favre, right off the bat, I would like to ask you about these funds. A Mississippi state audit found that about $5 million in TANF resources were reallocated to pay for the construction of a volleyball facility at your alma mater, a facility that you were very interested in seeing come to fruition. An additional $1.7 million was directed to a drug company in which you are an investor. And still another $1.1 million in speaking fees was given to you for speeches that you never gave. Now, you and your attorney stated that you repaid the speaking payments, but not the others. And additionally, the state of Mississippi is pursuing interest on these millions of dollars. Do you plan on repaying these funds to the state of Mississippi so that families in need, who are the beneficiaries of TANF, can receive the benefits that they are due?
Well, first of all, and thank you for your question. I have repaid, and to my knowledge, I am the only person who has repaid any money.
Have you repaid interest on the millions of dollars that were misallocated?
No, I have not.
Okay, thank you. You've come in support of President Trump's campaign, and the Trump abortion ban makes it illegal for a woman to access reproductive health care in the state of Mississippi. The funds you are alleged to have misused are from a program that overwhelmingly serves poverty-stricken single mothers who are some of the women most affected by Trump's radical abortion ban. So tell me, Mr. Favre, do you think it's acceptable to divert critical funding away from disadvantaged women who need it the most?
Well, first of all, I have no knowledge of President Trump's policies in regards to that, and I'm not directly involved.
Well, the question is a simple yes or no. Do you think it's acceptable to divert TANF funds away from women who need it the most? Thank you. Mr. Favre, you're testifying before this committee today amid allegations of fraud, and you are alleged to have used funding meant for low-income families to help fund a volleyball center at the University of Southern Mississippi. And as you can see behind me, these are texts between yourself and Nancy New, who pled guilty to similar charges back in 2022. You've denied knowledge of TANF's stated purpose, although it's frankly in the name, temporary assistance for needy families. And you've also stated in your testimony that you want to help protect TANF, presumably from people like yourself who use it for unrelated spending. I'm going to set aside that the fact that not knowing the law, so not having knowledge of a law is not an excuse for breaking it, and that's a concept that my son even understood at 10 years old. You stated that you are here today to encourage the federal government to increase oversight for the TANF program. But sitting here today, I don't know that you possess any credentials that make you any kind of expert in TANF or how funds are allocated. You've never worked with TANF funds or you've never received them. So I'm going to direct my next question to somebody who is actually a subject matter expert on TANF. So Mr. Dortch, you were one of the early advocates who called attention to the corruption in Mississippi's TANF program. I just want to know, how do you think families were directly affected by years of bad or negligent actors who misuse those funds?
Well, thank you for the question. Mississippi just has a history of making it hard for people to be able to access benefits that they're entitled to. I think what you see with TANF is a lot of people don't even try. They give up. They don't think that this program is going to assist them. If anything, they think that they could get in trouble by trying to get assistance from this program. And the insane thing about it is we have a state director who says just as much, and he's like, we can't get people to come apply, and he wonders why. And I'm like, you have a history of punishing people if they make any mistake, and the assistance that is available is not enough to really support anyone. So you don't get cash support, you don't get all of these other job support things that you need. They have made it people are really just too afraid to even approach the TANF program.
But if people were able to access TANF funding, and if TANF funding did the things that it was intended to do, how could that make a difference in these families that are struggling to make ends meet?
I think what we've seen, especially with programs in Jackson, the Magnolia Mothers Trust, is that people that get cash assistance, they're able to buy groceries for their families, they're able to buy things for their children, they're able to get the space to breathe, to be able to do things like apply to go to school, look for other jobs. They aren't so pressured in life by trying to make ends meet when they can't make those ends meet. It's too many. There are too many people in our state that are just lacking the resources, and to see that millions are going out the window and not helping anyone, it's really frustrating.
Does it make you angry?
Yes.
It makes me angry too.
For about 6 years.
The lady's time is expired by 50 seconds.
I yield back the balance of my time.
There was no balance. Mr. Ferguson?
Well, there were many members that went over their time, Mr. Chairman, but I'll accept it.
Not Republicans today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, Mr. Favre, I'm going to thank you for coming. Unlike my colleague, I'm not mad at you about much, but I am mad that you couldn't stay with the Atlanta Falcons. It would God, what could have been, but beyond that, I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you coming knowing that you were going to get asked some tough questions, because I know you're trying your best to make sure this doesn't happen elsewhere, right? And so thank you for stepping up and doing that. And do you think, based off of your knowledge and what happened in Mississippi, if Congress doesn't act, this may happen in other places?
Well, quite frankly, I think if nothing's done, it will happen in other places, and does happen. So first and foremost, something needs to be done to make sure people get it that need it.
Thank you. A lot of conversation today on lifting people out of poverty. It's been my experience in growing up in West Point, Georgia. We saw the effects of what happened when you lose tens of thousands of jobs, primarily as a result of decisions that are made by this place. We lost about 35,000 textile jobs in our area following NAFTA. And in the following years, we watched a lot of people fall into poverty. and they get trapped in a cycle of poverty because they don't have access to the jobs that they once did. And it's pretty painful to watch your friends and family, lose what they had. And you can, I think the right thing to do to help our most vulnerable is to do just that. It's to help them. Make sure that they got some resources so they've got a chance to get through the bind that they find themselves in when they don't have access to a good paying job, whether they lost that job or whether they're looking for their first job. But, Mr. Underhill, I really appreciate your story, and it reminds me of a lot of folks back home that just really had to fight and scrap to get over that hump. But I think you're right in that if you don't have a job, you're never going to get over that hump. You're going to keep running into that same hump. And could you talk just a little bit, not just about, getting over that hump, but, some of the barriers that a lot of people in poverty face trying to get from point A to point B, whether it's education, whether it's the financial cliffs that occur when you start making money, your safety net just goes away altogether. Do you think it'd be more advantageous to have a safety net system that gradually went down as individual found success in the workplace?
I think that would be extremely beneficial. Like you said, when you do get gainful employment, your benefits or welfare or whatever you got coming stops. And you may not be over that hump yet. And if you don't have, like you said, a little bit of a safety net that would help you get over that hump, that way when you're on the other side, you've gained the knowledge and experience to proceed without it.
Yeah, it's just, I think people get trapped in cycles of poverty. Not because they're not trying to get out, but I mean, if you get a job and you're making $15 an hour and then all of a sudden your benefits are cut all the way back, you're losing money, right? So you gotta have some sort of tapered program. And let me say this about jobs. Rural Mississippi, Mr. Dortch, I think y'all talking about how there are just some counties where there just aren't jobs, right? And listen, being from Georgia, we got some counties like that as well. And a job 25 miles away might as well be 150 miles away if you can't get there. But I think we've got, one of the reasons I think it's so important we're talking about this with job creation is to think about what happens in the coming years, doing everything that we can to make America the most competitive place in the world to do business and grow jobs. America works when Americans are working. And we've got to be creating jobs in all of our counties, and some of those may not be traditional manufacturing jobs. They may be technology jobs that really quite candidly give people access to a digital economy and a great way to make a living that they currently don't have. So I recognize the challenge in a rural county. When you're poor in a rural county, you're not black, white, Hispanic, you're just poor in a rural county. And you need a little help to get over that hump, and we need to be growing this economy at an exponential rate to help our fellow Americans. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Sewell.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I came to the House Ways and Means Committee to fight the war on poverty, not to hurt the impoverished. And I think that today's testimony and today's hearing, puts a spotlight on what I think is a glaring problem, which is the fraud and abuse. We have heard time and time again that the false narrative, in my opinion, that the people living in poverty seek to take advantage of this public life-saving program like TANF, when in fact, I think this hearing has shown that major fraud occurs when these programs on the state level are taken advantage by state officials entrusted to manage these programs, not by struggling parents and families. Most TANF recipients in my district, I have to say, and I understand half of the families receiving TANF, include support for our children. So the face of TANF in so many ways are our children. That makes, I think, the fraud and abuse even worse, because we're literally taking money out of the, out of the hands of children. This misuse of TANF funds poses a serious threat to those health conditions and make life even more difficult for those children and their families. I think we need accountability, but at the same time, I'd like to explore what states like Mississippi are doing. I represent the state of Alabama, and we make it very, very difficult for people to apply for TANF. And I'd like for you, Mr. Dortch, to talk a little bit more about what the barriers are and what reforms. You know, this hearing is really about acknowledging a problem. All of us acknowledge it, but what are we going to do about it, right? And I think it's appalling that if the state of Mississippi is receiving funds back because of this fraud and abuse, that they're not directing those funds to the needy families that that didn't get the funding that they needed because of the fraud. That's one reform, and I know that the Integrity Act that many of my colleagues are authors of, and I support, would do just that. Can you talk to us about what the reforms should be? Sure.
You know, as I mentioned before, the requirement that you do an upfront job search is something that definitely needs to end. The drug testing requirements, that prevents people from applying. And we know everyone that has used drugs is not a terrible person or a criminal, but if you know that's in your system, you're not going to apply for these benefits. And also the sanctions that can happen when a person fails to make a meeting, a routine meeting with their counselor with TANF, you can be sanctioned in other areas and lose benefits. There are so many things that are put in place to make it difficult for people to be able to access benefits, and that prevents folks from even trying to get it.
In so many ways, what you're saying is that people distrust the system, and also that we set up barriers that make it much, much harder for real needy families to get help. And, you know, I think that we have to work with the state level. When we send these funds down, we need to give the proper guardrails and put those proper guardrails and not leave it to ambiguity, so much ambiguity that this abuse could actually fall within the realm of possibility and therefore happens. And so, look, I think, Mr. Dortch, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, the punitive nature of a lot of these barriers.
Yeah, I mean, it starts from a place of the government not trusting folks and being punitive to low-income folks. We apparently trust a program to receive $86 million a year, even though they've committed outstanding acts of fraud, and there are no requirements, no sanctions put on that program. But people that are receiving just $260 a month, we want to check their income every month. We want to verify that they went on a job search. We want to drug test them. We want to scrutinize them as much as possible. When I'm simply saying that I don't distrust everybody in my state. I don't start from a place thinking someone is trying to game the system. I think people are trying to do good by their families, and they're trying to make it in a tough place to make it. And to treat people essentially like they're criminals and have their tax returns even audited for receiving benefits is insane to me, and it's very hurtful as well.
And it seems to be costing the children who it's supposed to benefit their ability to get ahead. So, Mr. Chairman, before I close, I just want to reiterate that I think there's a lot of bipartisan support in us coming together and trying to find some solutions, and I, for one, would love to help to lead that charge. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to yield some time to Mr. Ferguson.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit 2 letters for the record, one from the California Welfare Fraud Investigators Association and the United Council on Welfare Fraud. They're both applauding this committee for having this hearing.
Without objection.
Thank you. Yield back.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing, and thank you for our witnesses for being here to highlight some of the issues that we're facing, some of the things we want to make happen to get positive output and results with the TANF system. I'm glad we're talking about how we can reform and improve TANF to make sure that beneficiaries actually benefit from what they're meant to be served. We've been talking a lot about the need for guardrails to prevent misuse of TANF funds and for making sure that funds get to the right recipients. But today I want to highlight a TANF-funded program that has been a great success and a responsible steward of critical taxpayer monies. JAG-K, or Jobs for American Graduates in Kansas, is part of a national JAG program that offers students in grades 6 through 12 the tools they need to successfully transition from post-secondary school, the military, or directly into the workforce with marketable skills. Participants in the program face multiple barriers to succeed from their JAG-K career specialist helps them overcome through a nationally accredited, evidence-based model. As one student said, JAG-K teaches us how to set goals and accomplish tasks necessary for success. I've met some of these students and can attest to how impressive they are and how much they credit JAG-K for helping them get where they are. In Kansas, JAG programs serve approximately 6,200 students in 48 school districts across the state, including 805 high school graduates last year. JAG-K has exceeded national standards in the top measure of success categories since the class of 2014. And unlike some of the data stated today, the administrative costs of JAG-K are less than 9% of the total budget. JAG-K also goes to great lengths to protect TANF funds and the integrity of its funding. The JAG-K team submits a budget at the beginning of the year, and each month itemizes expenses against the budget, submitting receipts and documentation to support those expenditures. They're audited annually, and independent auditors test their internal controls. In addition to the financial reporting, JAG-K submits monthly programming status reports and quarterly progress reports towards performance measures. JAG-K then produces final reports on both TANF expenditures and program outcomes. The success of the JAG-K program, both in student outcomes and responsible stewardship of taxpayer monies, shows how appropriately used non-assistance TANF funds can make a positive change in a society. With the right changes and guardrails in place for TANF, more and more of these well-funded and well-functioning and successful programs can serve people in need across the country. As we've observed in Kansas with JAG-K, flexibility in how states use non-assistance funds has allowed states to fund highly successful programs that follow the spirit of TANF, but clearly there's room for improvements. Mr. Adolphsen, as we think through possible reforms, what suggestions do you have for eliminating a potential abuse while still maintaining flexibility for states and truly successful programs?
Thank you, Representative, for the question. Another great example you just highlighted of success in the program. There's a lot of it. Obviously, we're talking about misuse, but there's some great programs out there. I would suggest a couple things. First is measure performance. And we need to do that very well, and we don't often enough. And so what do I mean by that? Every participant that comes in the program that we're helping walk through with case management, with job supports, with cash assistance, we should follow that person when they leave the program into their job. Did they stay at the job 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What happened? Did their incomes go up? And when we do that, you start to see which programs work the best, and we can put more resources towards those programs. We did that in Maine with our case management group that worked there, and it was amazing to watch those folks progress, doubling and tripling their incomes over the next year or two. So I think measuring performance outcomes of all these programs is a really critical step.
Thank you. And we know assistance on we know that spending on non-assistance as opposed to basic cash accounts for 78% of all TANF spending, yet there's so little data on the non-assisted funding services and tracking what's successful. So thank you all for your witnesses for being here. Thank you, Chairman, for putting this on. You know, these are just some of the ways that we can talk about how do we successfully use TANF programs and making sure that successful programs like JAG-K can continue to deliver results for those in need. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Smucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses for traveling to be with us here as well. We've heard a lot about the importance of the TANF program to help low-income individuals achieve independence through connecting them with stable employment, strengthening their families. We've heard also, we know that states have a great deal of flexibility when determining how to use the TANF dollars to best meet the needs of program participants. And of course, we've heard a lot about the lack of proper oversight and accountability that's led to significant abuses of the funds. Mr. Underhile, we appreciate you being here, sharing your story, and I think you've highlighted, you've talked about, many of us have talked about the importance of re-entering the workforce, finding meaningful employment to reach self-sufficiency, and I think that is really the ultimate objective of a program like this, to help individuals achieve self-sufficiency. We've talked about a bill that Dr. Wenstrup and I have introduced, and I just have a chart here to highlight, I think, the importance of this bill. Mention the flexibility that states have. Only 8% of TANF. TANF is used for a number of different ways by each state, but only 8% overall of TANF non-assistance funds were spent on work or work education or training activities. That's the arrow you see. So that little blue block just shows the amount of dollars that have gone to directly help individuals get assistance and find work. And so I think it's a problem. It's an opportunity to improve the system. And as I said, along with Dr. Wenstrup, have introduced the Reduce Duplication and Improve Access to Work Act. That's going to grant states flexibility to devote a portion of the funds received to workforce training programs through WIOA, or the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. So I'd like to just talk a little bit, maybe Mr. Adolphsen, I'll ask you, what kind of impact do you think that legislation would have, reducing, if it is successful in reducing duplication and allowing states to direct more dollars towards getting more individuals into the workforce, what impact would that have on recipients?
Sure, thank you, Representative. Two things come to mind. The first is sends a good signal, a strong, good signal that we're going to refocus and rebalance this spending back towards the key objective of work. The second thing is, WIOA and the groups that participate in that are especially skilled at getting people back to work. That's what they do every day, and so it makes sense to partner with them. I would make sure, certainly, that the rules of the program, follow that funding so that it stays committed to helping the lowest income people, adults, kids in the house, help them get back on their feet and back into jobs. So to have those guardrails with that funding would be excellent, and it would send a great signal that we're getting back to work.
Maybe a follow-up to that. You talk about the guardrails, and I think it's important that states have guardrails to prevent the kind of abuses that we've seen in Mississippi, if we've heard, and other states as well. But on the other hand, you want to balance that, I think, with sometimes sort of one-size-fits-all guardrails, if you would say, or mandates out of D.C. Maybe don't always allow dollars to be used in the best way. So, what would be the balance? How would you suggest we write these regulations so that we can prevent the kind of abuses we've seen, but also ensure that the states have the flexibility to use the dollars in the best way they see in their jurisdiction?
Yeah, it's a great question. You kind of have to go back to the reason TANF was started, right? To get off of the trend of dependency and spending that was ever increasing. And what we've seen in other programs who didn't go that way, the SNAP program, the Medicaid program, they're now spending 5 times, 7 times, 8 times what they did before, and more people are trapped in dependency on those programs. So you don't want to undermine that flexibility entirely. It's all about putting up those guardrails. And I would say one thing is require an annual audit. There's too much discretion left up to state auditors right now to get, to hear from a whistleblower in order to look at the program, and it's sporadic when the program gets checked. It should just be a simple, basic up and down look at all the contracts and all the spending every year. That would be a really basic guardrail. Could keep states flexible, but also protect against kind of the worst misuse.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time, but I think that's great input, great feedback. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Del Bene?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. I just want to highlight first that when we are in a situation where we are right now, where funding the government comes down to the last minute because normal funding bills aren't being passed, we put all the families on TANF at risk. They don't know whether funding is going to come through or not. So I just want to highlight again that the political games, the lack of leadership to move funding bills forward has a real impact on people's lives, and how important it is that we pass full year bills before the fiscal year starts. Mr. Dortch, as a former state legislator, you worked tirelessly to bring attention to the long-standing pattern of corruption in Mississippi's TANF program. I wondered, can you tell us or share some of your former constituents' stories, how that corruption impacted their lives and the impact of bad actors who caused eligible applicants to be denied assistance?
Sure, and a lot of the constituent stories I've heard, and this is come in thanks to many of the child care operators in Mississippi, organizations like Mississippi Low Income Child Care Initiative, Mississippi Black Women's Roundtable, the Children's Defense Fund. It seems to be that child care centers and child care and altogether is like a nexus point where all of this issues with TANF and acquiring benefits come together. Like you have child care operators that are employing people that can qualify for TANF and have trouble getting those people employed or keeping them employed or being able to keep that person certified as a child care operator. Then you have parents that have problems with their child care certificate, and it may be impacted by them applying for TANF. So a lot of these issues just really bubble up with folks that are trying to do the right thing, and TANF can be more of a penalty to folks than it is a benefit.
What can be done to help support the eligible applicants who were denied assistance because of corruption and bad actors?
Again, just keep it simple. We know what people need. We know child care is a big impediment to work. We know that people cannot go to work if they can't travel and they can't drive to a job. These are direct things that can be given to folks or provided to folks that we know will help them be able to work more. You can work more if you're a parent and you have someone that can take care of your children. The absence of that is something that's jarring in Mississippi, so we have to make that a priority. Innovation is great, but let's make sure states are doing the basic things that we already know work.
You touched on this a little bit and you said in your testimony too that the Mississippi legislature has largely failed to address TANF fraud. What new laws should the state legislature pass to reform its TANF program to better serve the people of Mississippi?
I got about a dozen I filed and other friends in the legislature filed. I don't know where to start, but oversight is a big thing. It was insane how hard it was to get information from our TANF, on our TANF program, even as a state lawmaker. So transparency is a big thing. I think making sure that money is going to people that need it and that we increase the benefit because the benefit is already too low. We need to make sure that as much is going into child care as possible. If that means transferring money from the TANF program to child care, I think that's great. I still remember an opportunity I had to ask the former DHS director who's since pleaded guilty to fraud. We had a long list of people waiting to get child care benefits. And I asked him, why can't TANF, if you've got all of this money you're not spending, why can't you put this money into child care? And his response was, well, we would have to create another program. And so I said, create another program. you're being creative with this Families First and letting them spend $50 million on nothing. So just the attitude of we're not here to help people, we're here to essentially punish people and make things punitive on them.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Madam
Gentlewoman
Chair.
yields. We now recognize Mr. Hearn for 5 minutes.
We appreciate you all being here today. Well, I didn't grow up in Mississippi. I grew up in Arkansas in the Ozark Mountains, and I don't have to go talk to constituents about this because I lived and breathed this as a young child and lived on AFDC, which was the prior TANF back in the day. And you still talk to family members who are perplexed when I tell them after I got here and got on Ways and Means about 3.5 years ago, and I was on the subcommittee of work and welfare, and I learned then, and I just verified 134 programs in the federal government spending over $1.1 trillion annually for the social safety nets. Another $770 billion a year spent by state and local governments. So almost $2 trillion annually. And if you're poor in America, you would have a hard time believing that. And as Mr. Dortch just said, it's insane to see the amount of money that's going out of the federal government that's never helping a single person. And it's really a sad notion, because this describes, TANF is just one of the many issues we have in this area when you have this much money. And, as a member of Congress for the last 5.5 years, what I find here is nobody has the intestinal fortitude on either side to get rid of a program. We just put another one on and it becomes even more inefficient. There are 7 different cabinets that manage these programs in the federal government, and they're not doing a very good job. I think it's time we actually sit down and go through every one of these again to see if we're actually doing a great job or not. There's a saying in business that marketing 50% is bad. If you could figure out what that was, you'd be a lot more efficient. Probably half of this money that goes out is going into places of fraud we're having to deal with when you have state agencies that have all this control and power. There's an old saying that says, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. I think, Mr. Underhile, I think that's exactly what you're saying, is you learned how to fish and you learn how to get a job and work. What I find in my family members over the years, that they've gotten very frustrated at the federal government, not because or people, because they've seen a similar lifestyle, and those people have gone on to success in life because they chose the route that you did. And I would argue one that I did. And you learned how to work, you got better, you got educated, life was tough. Many times you thought it was unfair that you took the road of hard knocks, but you're thankful for that now because maybe siblings or cousins or uncles or aunts that you left behind, they're very frustrated. They're jealous of you because the government didn't make them what you worked your tail off to get to. That's the American opportunity that we need to continue to protect. And we've got to help people get off, up, have a hand up and not continuous handouts. And the education part, as my colleague Mr. Smucker said, is really important. When I first moved to Oklahoma, I had the opportunity to chair a 7-county workforce WEOA board. And where all the agencies and all the different groups came together on education, how to get people, a job so they could get a better job, so they could get a career. This is what this place is supposed to be about, is helping those who need help. And we're not doing a really good job of it. This and other committees have the jurisdiction of that. We need to pause for a minute because we're not doing right by the American people. And some say, how much are we helping? Well, since our war on poverty, since 1965, $30 trillion has been sent out to the American people, out to the states. And we've been woefully ineffective in making that work. We still have places like in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Oklahoma that really need a lot of help. Missouri need a lot of help. And we need to stop and pause. And if we really care about the American people, it's not about the money. We've got the money. It's just we're not being effective in these programs. So, I would love for you to, one more time, for the record, tell your story about what it meant for you to get a check and to grow that check and to get that first job, the job, to get a better job, to work on a career. I think it's a story that every American needs to hear that thinks there's no hope in America.
The Skill Up program that I went through when I went to school, had they not give me the $15 a day, as long as I attended school that day, I got $15 a day to help for gas for a 60-mile round trip every day. That took a burden off my wife And I understand having to have transportation back and forth to work and programs to provide that. And everybody wants to talk about the kids, the kids, the kids. Well, the kids are victims of their parents. We're all in charge and responsible for our own choices. If those programs are available and I have to take a drug test to be available for that program, if I want my kids a better life, stop doing drugs. Get up and go to work every day. I mean, the programs are there. Yeah, they're probably difficult, and some of them are difficult to get signed up for and get what you need, but they're there, and you're responsible for yourself and your family. Get up and do what you need to do.
I want to say thank you. We've run out of time here, but I appreciate so much, all of you all being here to put a spotlight on this issue. Again, it's one of the many parts that we need to get after. And I think it's a bipartisan approach to make this work, and we've got to get together and really help the American people. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here today. I really wish that I had the available time to speak with each of you, because I think it's just so important. And I'm encouraged that we are taking the necessary steps to ensure that TANF, non-assistance spending has appropriate oversight. In reviewing the GAO's statement for the record, highlighting the forthcoming report from Chairman Smith and Chairman LaHood requested to investigate TANF's non-assistance spending, one of the things that disturbed me was how widespread and repetitive TANF waste, fraud, and abuse is in our country, and how weak our accounting systems are to catch and correct it. According to the GAO, 99 of the 155 audit findings have repeated for at least 1 year. In my home state of West Virginia, they've had the same internal control deficiency finding reported for 15 years, and nothing has been done to correct it. Mr. Favre, do you believe more scandals like the one that you found yourself involved in Mississippi is possible across the country if we don't act now to reform and bring more transparency and accountability to TANF?
100%, absolutely. If it can happen in my state, it can happen in any state. And you just spoke on the statistics, and it's kind of frightening, to be honest with you, what is being wasted.
Well, thank you for that answer, and I'm sure there's a lot more that you could say. I'll talk to Mr. Adolphsen a little bit as well. TANF is our nation's primary welfare program, but it's my understanding is that there are no federal guidelines about eligibility, and that there are issues about how funding is allocated to the states. We know TANF is not allocated to each state based on the number of families in poverty, but based on your testimony, we know that you believe TANF could be better utilized if that were the case. For example, in West Virginia, we've historically had a higher poverty rate compared to the rest of the country, and that would mean that my home state would need more funds to address the unique challenges and demographics of my rural community. What can we do on the federal level to make sure that TANF money is actually getting to families in poverty and to states with the highest rates of poverty?
Thank you, Representative, for that question. Just to mention, one of the things we could do right now to stop this from happening is to actually enforce some of the rules we do have. So California has been out of compliance for 15 years with their work participation rate. HHS has said that there's $1 billion in fines, essentially, that they should levy, but they've written that down to $60 million. We have these audits that you mentioned that the GAO is looking at. The first and easy step is just to act on those basic oversight measures that we can already take. And I think just the question of the funding is exactly right question. How do we make sure, there's money in these programs, right? There's unobligated funds, there's carryover funds, there's a large outlay of funding to the states. We need to make sure it gets targeted down to the folks who need it the most. We need to get into the rural areas, into the areas of each state with the highest levels of poverty, where they need some case assistance to help get back on their feet. And the way that can be done is by making sure states use most of that funding to meet the core objectives, because those are going to target those in poverty directly.
Well, the criteria, is there any other criteria other than poverty rates that you believe actually could be prioritized when determining which families receive the TANF funds, so that we can ensure that the neediest families get it?
Yeah, good question. It should be, there should be some income thresholds associated with this support, and not just the cash support in the states, but also these other job assistance programs, education attainment. Again, California spends $1 billion a year on tuition for higher education, for college. Well, that is not directly for the purpose of the program when that has no income threshold on it, and you have families well above the poverty line, 6 figures, getting those tuition grants.
So they're working the system.
That has to stop in order to make sure we can target the funds to those who are truly in need.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back my time. Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields. We now will hear from Ms. Chu for 5 minutes.
I hope that every member of this committee, regardless of party, can agree that a terrible crime happened in Mississippi. It is outrageous that millions in federal TANF dollars meant to support low-income families was used instead to fund wealthy individuals and their pet projects, such as building a new volleyball stadium. Congressmember Benny Thompson has written a series of letters, very insightful and important letters, and one thing struck me. He said, according to the audit that exposed the scandal, Mississippi could have purchased roughly 3 million diapers with the $1.1 million in welfare funds that MDHS paid Brett Favre. And I acknowledge that you repaid the funds too. But to think about what happened, that equaled about a year's worth of diapers for 1,145 moms. Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the nation, with 20% of the citizens living below the poverty line. And even though Mississippi recovered this money, the state is still not reinvesting the money in the families that needed it the most. And right now, the federal government has no authority to conduct oversight into how these states spend non-cash assistance TANF funds, which is about 80% of all TANF spending. And so while my Republican colleagues are focusing their attention on individual TANF recipients, despite there not being any evidence that these low-income families are defrauding the program, Representative Danny Davis and I have introduced a bill that would actually address what happened in Mississippi by giving the federal government the power to oversee how states are using funds and to require states to not only recover misused funds, but to return them to low-income families. So, Mr. Dortch, can you elaborate on what went wrong in Mississippi, including why certain organizations were able to misuse funds and why there's such a lack of transparency around what happened, and how the bill that Representative Davis and I have introduced, the TANF State Expenditure Integrity Act, would have helped?
Yeah, I mean, essentially there was a lack of interest in what TANF was supposed to be in Mississippi, from state legislators to the governor. There was not, at some point, someone realized there was a big pot of money that we could turn into a slush fund, and that the legislature was not going to look into it, that nobody was going to know. And not only that, we could frame it as a success story, because instead of you coming asking for these benefits at a DHS office, we're going to send you to a nonprofit called Families First and tell you that they're going to help you, even though they provided no assistance. As far as the legislation, the penalties, that's very important, and it's important that you do it in a way that penalizes the state and not the people in need. Mississippi has routinely ignored directives to actually invest back into people in need. Like, for instance, the state was cited for failing to take care of foster children, and our foster care system was almost taken over. Court ordered them to invest billions of dollars to hire new caseworkers and social workers. The state still did not do that. They didn't make the investment. When they started making the investment, they took the money from TANF. So every year they've been appropriating $30 million from TANF to comply with a court order to take care of foster children. The state did not put up its own money and say, we've been failing these children that are in our system. They said, we'll steal it from another program that is supposed to go to needy people.
Yeah. Unbelievably, only 4% of those eligible in Mississippi are able to get direct TANF benefits. This is not a sign of success, as some on this panel have suggested. It is a crying shame, especially since the Census Bureau has shown that child poverty in the U.S. is on the rise, especially following Republicans' refusal to extend the expanded child tax credit. And so, can you explain why families lose TANF benefits in huge numbers?
Yeah, I mean, Mississippi, of course, makes it very difficult for you to be able to get these benefits, as we talked about. There are so many barriers that prevent someone from applying for these benefits. As the state director has said, a lot of people don't know how to access these benefits because we've had a system in place where the state did not actually have a TANF program. It outsourced it to a third party. So the systems just aren't in place for people to get the assistance they need.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. The chair recognizes Mr. Kustoff from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing today. Mr. Adolphsen, if I can with you, I know we've talked a lot about TANF and the federal government and more than 80 safety net programs at a cost of over $1 trillion every year. And that's probably part of the problem. We know that there are a lot of programs. They're kind of a maze of programs. It's challenging for states. It's tough to navigate for families. Can you talk about how TANF fits into the larger picture, if you will, and how we can make sure that programs are not duplicative, if that makes sense, and better coordinate the welfare programs to families in need?
Sure, thank you for that question, Representative. TANF is special in terms of all those myriad programs you talked about because it's the one that's really centered around getting people back on their feet and eventually off government dependence altogether. And so it's unique in that, and it plays a special role. And a lot of the conversation even today you hear is around the cash portion where someone receives some cash on their card in order to help them. Well, it's to help them eventually not need that anymore. And that's exactly what it's done. And when you hear about it's difficult for people to get, that is a statement about the cash. And there is a time limit and a work requirement in place for a reason. Because folks coming in that door trying to find their way out of government dependence and into self-sufficiency, they need a timeline to work from. And that's exactly what TANF has done. There aren't those same time limits on case management and job training and education and things that will help move them up and out of poverty for the long term. And so that really is TANF's unique role, is dedicated funds to give people not just a short-term handout, but a long-term hand up and onto a job.
Thank you. One of the reforms that this committee has led as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act was to have Health and Human Services start collecting data on outcomes so that we can improve transparency and also better understand what's working. Do you have any thoughts, if you will, about how we can put in place outcomes measures specifically for TANF non-assistance that can help drive states towards the outcomes that we want to see using any evidence-based approaches?
Yeah, I think that the rules that TANF has in place now around work participation should follow TANF funding wherever it goes. So you can, currently a state can move 20% of the block grant to CCDF, another grant. They can send 10% to SSBG, another block grant. But the TANF rules around we need you to engage on job training don't follow that money. And that's when you end up with these issues of spending on things that are not directly over that target and that mission. And so I think one of the key guardrails would be to make sure that thread is followed along with the funding wherever it goes, that people need to participate in trying to get the training they need to get into a job.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And before I run out of time, I just want to acknowledge and thank each and every one of our witnesses for appearing here today. And I also want to acknowledge some of the people who have shown up here in our audience: the Black Women's Roundtable of Mississippi, the Children's Defense Fund of Mississippi, the American Civil Liberties Union. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Gwen Moore, and I hail from Wisconsin. And so I don't feel the same way that the Bears fans feel, quite clearly. But I do want to say that I was at the scene of the crime when we ended welfare as we knew it in 1996. I was in Wisconsin. I was a state senator. I had 100 amendments that would have addressed this problem. And what I am saying to you, I just want to repeat some of the things that have been said here already, that this flexibility was deliberate. It indeed, I agree with Mr. Dortch's characterization of it, is that it literally became a slush fund for states to do what they wanted to do. In our own state, we literally had people called diversion specialists, and it was their job to convince you when you showed up pregnant and one baby on one arm and the other at your feet, that you didn't need welfare funds, and all of that profit could be used to pay bonuses. I even had an amendment that was directed at some of the vendors who administered welfare to say, you can't earn more than the governor of the state, because these salaries were so lucrative. So surprise, surprise, here we are, 28 years later, discovering the fraud and waste and abuse in this program. Give me a break. Really, I'm offended. So now that we're here, I'm just really happy to be associated with Ms. Chu and Dr. Davis's bill. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill that would remedy some of these things. Let me start out by reviewing some of the testimony of our witnesses here. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Adolphsen. I read your testimony and I was very excited. I was very stimulated to hear about how the reforms have worked, how the 13.7 million people who were dependent on AFDC cash assistance were cut in half, and that how these single mothers leaving welfare after 1996 reforms entered the workforce in record numbers, boosting economic growth and leading to declines in child poverty. And then we went on to hear about how they had higher incomes and less dependency, and these able-bodied people found work in 600 different industries, touching every corner of the economy. Families saw their incomes more than double within a year of, I got really excited. And then I started reading the footnotes, and then I got a little disappointed to realize that, this was, yes, 80% of the people in the first couple of years after TANF, in the $16.5 billion we received, were receiving some sort of support from TANF. And then I have data here, and I will ask unanimous consent to put some of these things in the record, because it really didn't square with what we know, is that we have the same level of poverty. We have, 80% of the people who qualify, people who live in deep, deep, deep poverty, not getting the benefits. People in Mississippi getting, what did you say, Mr. Dortch? $236 a month in 2024. That's the truth. These data are not updated. It's not true. I just want to go on to talk about some other things that I saw in the report. You say that, and also some of your data, the 600 industries, that's in Maine. So I want to congratulate you with whatever you did in Maine. Whatever happened in Maine didn't happen in Mississippi. Just saying. I also want to talk a little bit to you. So I want to know, Mr. Dortch, do you find it surprising, based on your experience as a state legislator who couldn't get any answers, that deep poverty rose among Black and Latino children in the decade after the 99-6 law creating TANF, and that indeed more than half of these folks don't just live in poverty, at the poverty level, but they're like 50% of the poverty. They're living in deep, deep, deep poverty. Does that surprise you?
No, I think there's some correlation between the people that are hurt by the problems with TANF and the interest from the state in actually addressing those issues.
Okay, and just let me, before my time expires, I just want to say a couple of things to our other witnesses. Mr. Underhile, I think you'd be a great peer support specialist. I wish TANF could be used so you can get that degree to do that. I think the increased earnings from your family of 9 people would be something I wouldn't begrudge you. And I'm a fan of the Green Bay Packers. I want that on the record, Mr. Chairman. And I know that Brett Favre knows better than anybody that in a foul situation, it's the second player that gets the flag. And I would yield back.
Thank you. Let's put on the record that I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan. Ms. Tenney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to say thank you so much to our witnesses for this has so far been a very, very interesting and insightful hearing. All the witnesses have been phenomenal, and I just want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a report by the Department of Health and Human Services entitled, "New York did not have adequate oversight of its reported temporary assistance for needy family program expenditures."
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report is so important because it highlights the need for flexibility, but also the need for accountability in how taxpayer funds are being spent. And I heard one of the most, and all the witnesses have been great for various reasons, and I want to just say, one of the most important things that was said in this hearing was by Mr. Adolphsen, and he said, work is central to the well-being of human beings. Thank you for saying that, because the whole point of this program is a work program, a welfare to work program. And when you see somebody like Mr. Underhile, I hope I pronounced your name right, it's such an honor to meet you and your wife. Really, really, you are a testament to the success of this program. You are someone who've been through tough times. The TANF program has given you an opportunity, you and your family, and you're a true inspiration, and your wife, to raise your children, to do what you've done, to overcome. And I echo the sentiments of Ms. Moore. You should be continuing to help other people where this program has worked. Unfortunately, states like New York spend so much of the taxpayer dollars on are not accountable. Our own federal government has looked at New York and said that they have not adequately documented the uses. They have to prove that it's necessary, reasonable, and the allocation of these funds are used to the performance of TANF, getting people back to work. Financial management systems weren't in place properly in New York. They didn't permit tracing of funds to see where these funds were going. And that's what we're really getting to. I think both sides of the aisle agree. It's not people like Mr. Underhile, it's not Mr. Favre, it's the administrators of the program in Mississippi, New York, and other places that haven't been good stewards of taxpayer money. We agree this program works, and you, Mr. Underhile, are a beautiful example of how this program works and why we need so many other people to come out of poverty to do that. And my own father was a poor person with 7 brothers and a sister. They didn't have access to programs like this, but they went to work and they understood the dignity of work and what it did to free them from some of the issues they had, and to become successful human beings and wonderful parents, as you and your wife talked about in the back. I just want to first, though, say something a little bit about what we're doing on this. And under current law, TANF does not include a requirement that federal funds be used to supplement existing state spending. That is, states can use federal TANF funds to finance activities that previously had been state and local responsibilities. This has allowed states like New York to use these TANF funds to supplant state spending, fill budget gaps, so long as they can justify the program funded fits one of the 4 purposes. We know that New York wasn't able to do this. This only encourages poorly run states to further mismanage hard-earned taxpayer dollars. It's why I've introduced a bill called the Protect TANF Resources for Families Act. That means money is going to go to people like Mr. Underhile. It requires states to treat TANF funds as a supplement, not a substitute for existing state welfare spending. In doing so, my bill will help federal dollars go farther and have a larger impact, and more people can be included. So I want to just thank you all for, Mr. Adolphsen, for pointing this important thing out. I do want to say something, though, to Mr. Favre, and I know we've had a lot of kidding aside. I'm a Bills fan, so it's go Bills for us, and we crushed it last night. Wonderful game against the Jaguars. So, and I'm a huge Josh Allen fan, but I was also one of your fans. So I wanted just to ask you about the mismanagement in Mississippi and the audit by New York, and ask you if you could maybe comment on the millions of needy families across the country that policymakers are trying to protect, and why it is so important for us to institute this program, particularly my bill, to make sure that we have oversight and accountability in place, and that these funds go to people like Mr. Underhile. If you could address that just real quickly.
Well, I think you said it about as simple as you can say. You know, we need to get the funds to the people who absolutely need them. And our federal government, you guys, are the ones that can get that done. You know, it's sad what's happened in Mississippi, not only to me, but to the many children that have had to suffer because of it. And as I said earlier, you know, I'm not the smartest person in the room, and there's been a lot of things that have been tried, but the oversight has got to improve, absolutely has to improve. I think mechanisms have been in place, or seemingly have been in place, but for some reason they have failed in a lot of states. And you know, I don't know if we need to do more programs or just clean up what we have, but the oversight is certainly very important.
Thank you for being here today, and I really appreciate it. I know your name and your fame have brought attention to this very important issue, and we just wish you the best with your recent diagnosis. And thank you for being here. We know it's not easy for you, and we appreciate you highlighting this really important issue. And to all the witnesses, I just want to say thank you again, and thank you to Mr. Chairman for having this great hearing. Thank you.
Ms. Fischbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, you know, I just wanted to comment. Ms. Moore said she was in the legislature. I was also in the Minnesota State Legislature when we dealt with this. And I thought, you know, I didn't have 100 amendments. I probably had a couple at the time. But I thought we did a fairly good job. Problem is that over the years, so much has been undone. What we did there in the late 90s, but over the years it's been undone. And so did mention I was from Minnesota, so I have to say something about it. And we really appreciated your years with Minnesota, but my staff makes me add, you know what, we don't appreciate your time with the Packers beating up on the Vikings. So, but in all seriousness, I genuinely appreciate all of the witnesses being here because, you know, it's important that we hear from folks, particularly Mr. Underhile, Mr. Favre, taxpayers. You have experience, you know what's, you know, you understand, and so I appreciate you being here because in the end, that was one of the things in Minnesota that we had to remember as we went through this, and while we're here, we have to remember it too, is that it's taxpayer dollars we are talking about, and so that accountability, that oversight, the requirements that we have on that is so critical. But Mr. Adolphsen, I just wanted to ask you, you know, there's statutory purposes for TANF. And, you know, we had a bill a while back about pregnancy care centers, and I know there was talk about Mississippi's policy, but other abortion policies, and so pregnancy care centers provide so much help there, and they offer a wide variety of services, support for mothers, families, and fathers, and they offer counseling, ultrasounds, parenting, prenatal education, diapers, all kinds of things. In your opinion, do those pregnancy care centers, such as the ones, some of the things that I mentioned, fit into one of those purposes for TANF, at least one of them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the 4 objectives of TANF, to help needy children be cared for in their home, to reduce government dependency of parents, prevent out of wedlock pregnancies, and the creation and formation of 2-parent families. I think it's pretty safe to say those community-based pregnancy centers fall within that scope.
So I feel like it's very important, you know, that for those needy families, that the pregnancy care centers not only provide tangible material supports, but they also offer, like you mentioned, promoting strong families and marriage. However, you may be aware, and we had the legislation last fall, the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Family Assistance Administration for Children and Families proposed a rule that could restrict states from using TANF funding for pregnancy care centers. And the Biden-Harris administration argues that pregnancy care centers should not be eligible for that for a variety of reasons, but one of those because they only help women after they become pregnant, and which to me doesn't make sense. But you know, how important is it that Congress exercises its authority to reform TANF through statute to provide states with clear and reliable rules for TANF instead of depending on Health and Human Services to issue regulations and guidance?
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think things need to be clear in statute. It is an issue. I saw that in the agency. If there's any vagueness in the law, the bureaucrats will make the law, and that needs to be dealt with. I think one of the solutions is having state legislatures sign off on these TANF plans. They need to have oversight over them and not leave it solely up to the folks in the department to make those calls. So I think statutory clarity is good. Again, just balancing it with the flexibility that has been successful, I think is important, but putting in guardrails so that it's all done within the lines in statute would be great.
And I appreciate that because I think sometimes, you know, with the guidelines and the rules, I sometimes call them DC need ideas, and they don't understand that really, you know, and they're passing a lot of these regulations and so-called guidelines, they don't really understand what's happening on the ground and the need, importance of what they're doing. So, but I appreciate, thank you very much, and thank you for all of you for being here, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing. And hearings are important, don't get me wrong. It's important that we understand, you know, the factual basis for taking legislative action. I just hope that we end up taking up some action as a result of this. There's been several references to legislation that Mr. Davis and Ms. Chu have proposed that would empower the Department of Health and Human Services to have the authority to crack down on these instances that we are hearing about right now. So let's commit to not just have a hearing and a discussion,
a conversation isn't going to stop this problem. And it's also true that we need to recognize the fact that TANF has been set at $16.5 billion since 1994. And so in real dollars, it's not providing the kind of help that it really should and was intended to provide. The other thing I want to point out is that if the focus particularly being on child poverty, the child tax credit, the enhanced child tax credit, was allowed to expire, despite the objections and serious efforts by the Biden-Harris administration, Democrats on this committee in particular. That child tax credit, that enhanced child tax credit, made a real difference. And I know some disparage it because it's providing direct support to these kids in the form of payments, cash payments to families. But let's not forget the effect that lifting those children out of poverty for those early years of life has on their long-term trajectory. Breaking that cycle of poverty is one of the things that the child tax credit has allowed us to do. It's a lifeline for millions of Americans, and it was, it has been supported in a bipartisan fashion for a long time. We ought to support getting back to that enhanced child tax credit. In my hometown, where am I from? Flint, Michigan. I have to mention it at every opportunity. But we've done some really important work. Building on the success of the enhanced child tax credit, led by my very good friend, a pediatrician by the name of Dr. Mona Hannah Atisha. We call her Dr. Mona. She has piloted a new program that provides critical financial support to moms and babies in that very first year of life to disrupt the cycle of childhood poverty and clearly improve their long-term prospects. This is work that's really important to the people I represent, and it's work that makes our communities just a better place. Unfortunately, that child tax credit and the other supports that came with it were allowed to expire. 3.7 million children thrust back into poverty. That's not good. So, Mr. Dortch, I wonder if you might just speak from your perspective on the urgency around restoring the enhanced tax credit and investing in programs like the one Dr. Mona, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's called RX Kids, how those programs ensure that those kids have a better chance, better trajectory in life, and potentially break that cycle of poverty.
Yeah, and I think I'll start by pointing out in Mississippi that when people lose their TANF benefits, we know it's supposed to be temporary, 70% of them lose their benefits for something other than eligibility or income. So people aren't working their way out of poverty, they're just being kicked off because of how the rules are set up to not give them the assistance. And I want somebody to learn how to fish. I don't want their families to starve while they're waiting for a bait. So you can do both. You can assist people and make it, give them the skills and help them get the skills they need to get a job while also making sure they're not starving. The program you're talking about sounds a lot like the one we have in Jackson with Magnolia Mothers Trust, where they provide $1,000 to low-income moms living in poverty, but they also provide one-on-one assistance to help that person be able to move out of poverty. It's not a one thing or the other. Mississippi is actually choosing to do neither. So we're not giving people money and we're not helping them get the job training they need. We're doing God knows what with the money. I mean, 4 years ago, we know what we were doing with the money. We were spending it on horse ranches, paying Mr. Favre here to make appearances at events. The other thing that I think about is if someone in Mississippi is accused of doing something, accused of misspending $50 in SNAP benefits, that person's life will be turned upside down. Mr. Favre is right here, and he's accused of misspending $1 million, and he's speaking before Congress. Something is wrong when we let that stay in place. And for 4 years in Mississippi, I know Mississippi might be the extreme, but the people in Mississippi still need the assistance. So if the system allows what happened in Mississippi to take place, it definitely needs reform.
Thank you, Mr. Dortch. I particularly appreciate you making that final point. You know, we have to hold everybody the same standard, and it's sometimes distressing to see that that's not taking place. With that, I thank the chairman for the additional time, and I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Still.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal for hosting this hearing. How funds are being used to target families in need, connect people to work, and improve accountability. I just want to go to Mr. Dortch that, you know, you said that some of the requirements to apply it, and it's actually preventing to apply it because they might use drugs. And do you think those people that this TANF program is get back to work for these poor families, those people who are using drugs, that do you think they're gonna get back to work and get out of poverty? And what kind of the requirement that we really need? Because in California, we have a lot of homeless people, and then we try to put them into the shelter and clean them up and then make sure that they get back to work. But you know what, a lot of people that they drinking and smoking and, you know, using drugs, they don't want to go back. And it is the problem right now that we have. So what kind of requirements that you are talking about? And, you know, I barely listened to you just only for that part. So can you elaborate for that?
Yeah, so Mississippi has drug testing requirements for anybody applying for TANF. Those requirements are in place to essentially punish those folks if they have that in their system. But we know we live in a real world where we know there's drug use, and that people that are using drugs, they are the people that we should be trying to assist and not telling not to come to our agency. We've got people that need help finding their way out of drug problems. I mean, and then when you look at what happened in Mississippi, we spent thousands of dollars sending someone to drug rehab through Families First. But we don't allow people that smoke marijuana to be able to qualify for TANF benefits.
But I really don't believe that, you know, those people still, going to rehab and try to make sure that they clean them up and then they apply it. I think that's going to make really sense because this is the government taxpayers' money, try to make them get back to work. But you know what, I'm going to go back to Mr. Adolphsen, because in California, we have a lot of problem. In your testimony that you provided the example of how California has redirected more than $1 billion per year in federal TANF funds to pay for college grants. It's mostly like nearly 650,000 college grants. That this is not the families that they really need those help, and then they cannot really escape the poverty because they don't need these college funds. As you stated, California Joint Legislative Budget Committee blatantly refers this scheme as the fund swap and fund shift, commingling the funds whereby the state use TANF funds to replace general funds expenses. So could you please elaborate for how to stop that, more about how California is spending TANF for grants so that middle-class families to go to college, not those families are in poverty, and then California puts TANF funds into the general fund, and Sacramento is basically steadily TANF non-assistant funds to cover other budget costs and things they want to spend in. We really have a problem because this is for families in poverty. They really need money to get back to work, but you know what? California state is not actually following those rules, and they're just commingling all the funds and go straight into the general fund. How are we going to stop this?
Thank you, Representative. Yeah, there's a real issue there, and I mentioned earlier, California state government isn't doing its job either. They need a work requirement because they're not engaging participants in TANF in helping them get back on their feet, and that's why they've failed their work participation rate for 15 years. That isn't the fault of the people who need help. It's the fault of state government who's failing them And we need to make sure and hold the state accountable for helping people like they're supposed to through this program. I think there's been bills introduced by this committee, and interestingly enough, part of the rule posed by the Biden-Harris administration is to cap at 200% receipt of non-assistance. That would take care of the $1 billion California is using to backfill their general fund, which they need because they're, $70 billion in the hole, giving Medicaid away to illegal immigrants.
Well, yeah, they did for $32 billion from uninsured insurance program, relief program during the COVID. So we really have a problem. But we had in California $92 billion surplus 2 years ago, and now suddenly we have $70 billion deficit. So we do exactly opposite of what California does. I think we're going to be successful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we gather today to discuss the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, it's essential that we start by asking the fundamental question, is this a government program truly helping American families to escape poverty, or has it become just another wasteful government initiative riddled with inefficiency, fraud, and abuse? Already in this hearing, we've heard many examples of shockingly inappropriate uses of federal taxpayer dollars. This is important. This is not one state wasting their own money. This hearing is about states wasting our federal dollars. The responsibility to safeguard the integrity of federal dollars is the federal government. But if we have these extremely large and vague programs sending money to questionable nonprofits that we don't know the names of, we cannot be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Let's be clear, waste, fraud, and abuse in TANF are not just isolated incidents. They're widespread. Countless federal taxpayer dollars intended for struggling families have been misused, misspent, or misallocated. Fraudulent claims, misuse of funds, and lack of oversight are rampant. The federal government was never meant to be in the business of long-term welfare. Our founding fathers understood that a centralized federal government would be inefficient in addressing the unique needs of local communities. Yet with TANF and other similar welfare programs, we've allowed bad actors across the country to take advantage of our federal dollars in the name of allowing states and localities to handle their own welfare systems. I'll start with Mr. Favre, a question to you. As you mentioned in your remarks, it has come to our attention that the state of Mississippi is using TANF funds to pay private lawyers for this ongoing litigation. I have some questions about the legality of using TANF for these funds. To me, it's still diversion of funds and just adding insult to injury. Do you know if the state is doing this and whether they've been able to provide an explanation for that?
That's my interpretation is that they're being paid with TANF funds, and I am not privy to any explanation.
How confident are you that the state of Mississippi is using TANF funds for lawful purposes and that guardrails are in place to protect the funds?
At this point, I'm not sure.
How does a nonprofit or individual that abuses TANF funds earn back the trust of its community? Can it take back the trust of local, state, and federal government?
I think that will take some time and hard work.
Mr.
As simple as that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Adolphsen, in my remaining time, is there answers to those questions that you would like to expand upon?
Sure. Thank you, Representative. I think just on the last question, all that was discussed today about guardrails and oversight, that's going to help on the receiving side too, on the nonprofits or other groups that end up receiving TANF to provide services. The checks and balances help them because sometimes with all the commingling of the funds and the grants that come down, they aren't clear on the rules either. And I think shoring that up and putting those guardrails in place will help and clearly restore some trust as well along the way.
Do you think that a lot of these functions of TANF would be better suited at the state level and state programs instead of a large federal bureaucracy?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the closer, I think anytime we're administering aid, the closer you can get to the person receiving the aid, the better. And I've seen that, work on the ground. The person who's sitting across from them, finding out what are their barriers to work, what do they need to overcome, what kind of support do they need. That's really the person who knows how we can turn that into a successful example, like one we have here today. And so we want to get the decision-making about how to help the person as close to that as we can, but we also need those boundaries, those high-level guardrails and oversight to make sure they don't stray.
So I represent a district in Florida, and in Florida I served in the state legislature, and you have programs that help needy families. So if I'm hearing you right, it would be beneficial if there's pieces of TANF that we think as a body would be better served at your local, state, and community levels to be able to effectuate those programs and ensure that fraud and abuse and those type of things aren't going on. That's something that you think you would support, that type of change.
Yeah, I think that the state level is the right place to operate these programs. However, if the federal government is paying for them, there needs to be proper oversight in place to manage that.
Thank you for your time. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Neal for this hearing. And gentlemen, thanks for all of you for taking the time today to be here and not just sit through this hearing, but provide meaningful information that hopefully we can use to ensure that we provide the solutions that are necessary for the issues that we're hearing about. Look, I think we can all agree, and you're kind of sensing the bipartisan support for TANF, but I think it's based on the fact that nothing should unite us more than the well-being of our children. And outside of the child tax credit, the TANF program is the largest source of cash assistance to low-income families in the United States. Now, nationwide, nearly 70% of TANF recipients are children. And in my home state of California, the TANF program serves more than 605,000 children in nearly 307,000 families. Under CalWORKS, the program responsible for allocating TANFs, the average grant under CalWORKS, under that program, was just over $1,000 a month. Now, for families in need, that can be the difference between paying bills, losing a home, or clearly putting food on the table. The TANF program not only makes a difference for household expenses, but it really can permanently lift people out of poverty like we've heard today. Moreover, due to the flexibility in TANF on how to use federal dollars, CalWORKS put nearly $1.28 billion into employment services in the 2022-2023 fiscal year. Unfortunately, though, as we've heard today, this flexibility has allowed bad actors to abuse the system. And that's why we still got some work to do. And I think we can all agree to that, to address the fraud in TANF while preserving and expanding these critical programs to serve our neediest constituents. Now, Mr. Underhile, in your testimony, you talk about the impact of the Missouri Excel Center Skill Up program and the impact it had on helping you turn your life around. Looking forward, if you were designing a job training program to help other people in your position, is there anything you do differently?
I would make job training the focus of it. The transportation, and not put limits on who's qualified. I know certain people that I went to school with that needed the Skill Up program for assistance didn't qualify because they were a single male with no kids. So they didn't qualify for transportation money. They didn't qualify for anything, honestly. It just, I think that training people to work and getting them back to work, I mean, welfare wasn't never meant to be a career choice. And honestly, if you don't care enough about yourself and your family to want to get out of that, then you don't deserve funds to begin with.
Understood. Mr. Dortch, you talk about the considerable resources Mississippi has put into fraud prevention, and it sounds like you see this as taking away from the people TANF is meant to serve, at least as my understanding. How much of this fraud driven by individual TANF recipients, and how much do you see it as at the institutional level, like organizations misusing funds? And if there were certain guardrails that Congress could put in place to let states like California keep their flexibility in the TANF programs it administers while continuing to prevent abuse and misuse of funds?
Yeah, so in Mississippi, when I was in the legislature, we passed something called the HOPE Act. This bill required agencies like DHS to put in place additional income verifications and have to contract with a third-party vendor to do those income verifications. So the current state director of the agency over TANF has asked the legislature for like 4 years now to repeal that act because he said it's wasteful. These are redundant policies. They're paying for nothing, and it's costing the state money. It's costing the state TANF money. And we're double and triple checking people when there's systems in place already for that. So because of politics, even though this Republican-appointed director of DHS has asked for this, the legislature is still keeping it in place. I mean, there was no point in having it when it passed, but to have the evidence come from the state that it's actually hurting them, and it may end up costing them SNAP benefits because of all of the high error rate that it's causing. And the legislature just shrugs and says, we'll keep it in there because we're going to be hard on welfare benefits.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks to all the gentlemen. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Beth Van Dyne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, state programs funded by TANF non-assistance dollars are designed to help countless Americans rise out of poverty through programs providing work support, education, training, reducing dependency on government. States are given significant flexibility when determining how to allocate these dollars, allowing programs to be tailored to meet each state's needs. For example, Texas has provided funding to more than 20 different programs supporting thousands of individuals through access to opportunities such as adult education and literacy and after-school programs. When TANF funds are utilized the way that they were intended, we've seen incredible success stories from those who have filled education gaps, benefited from specialized training programs, and received child care assistance. However, the drop in welfare caseloads and the dramatic shift in spending from direct benefits to non-assistant programs has also allowed an unprecedented amount of fraud and waste, as we've recently seen in Mississippi. It's vital that we maintain TANF's flexibility while implementing necessary safeguards to ensure tax dollars are spent responsibly and benefit those that are most vulnerable. It's also important that we don't forget that our aim here is not to arbitrarily strip benefits from those in need, but to encourage Americans to achieve success in self-worth. We've heard Republican states don't spend enough on basic assistance, or the benefits they do spend are small in comparison. But I want to add that there is some context to this. It's based currently on TANF funding is not allocated to states based on poverty. Let me repeat that. The way that it is allocated right now is not based on need. Instead, states are allocated TANF dollars based on what they've received in 1996, nearly 30 years ago, not the number of children and families below the poverty level today. And as a result of population changes, Republican states get significantly less money in TANF allocation than Democrat states. And for example, my home state of Texas, we receive $318 for every child in poverty, the lowest proportional TANF grant in the country. Meanwhile, New York receives nearly $3,000 in TANF funding per child. So any conversation about Republican states not providing enough basic assistance needs to recognize that this is a very important fact, that Republican states are getting significantly less dollars per family in poverty than our Democrat peers. Mr. Underhile, I want to commend you. I really appreciate your comment that welfare was never meant to be a career choice. That was very succinctly said. As you have heard, we're not all succinct in our comments, and it was a very powerful statement, and I appreciate you coming and sharing your experience with this program with us today. Mr. Favre, I appreciate the fact that you are here as well. It seems almost as if you are a victim of your own celebrity in this. Not everybody knows what these funds are used for or where the grant dollars come from. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your story. I'm interested, though, because I saw some of the headlines that had come out. Were you contacted by anybody else that had felt like they had been kind of abused of this, or what has been the response that you have gotten, and why did you feel it was necessary to come today and share your story?
Well, thanks for asking. No, I haven't heard from really anyone else. Coming here is, as I said earlier, is twofold. So it doesn't happen to someone else what's happened to me, but also we get the funding to who needs it. And it's used as it's supposed to. I had no idea what I was getting into and was only trying to do something good. And by no means did the term TANF or welfare was ever mentioned until after the fact. And that needs to change. And so, I mean, it's been a rough 3 to 4 years. You know, people in Wisconsin and Mississippi, I think for many years, maybe, I can't say that necessarily liked me, but appreciated the way I played and so on and so forth. But after, and really across the country, whether you're a fan or not, I was well received pretty much anywhere I went. That changed, understandably so. The fact that I was branded as a person who stole welfare money, that's the lowest of low. And it couldn't be further from the truth. So I don't wish this upon my worst enemy. And hopefully, as I said, we can get the money where it needs to go. We get better at oversight. And this doesn't happen to someone like myself in the future who's trying to do something good.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you had the integrity to return the dollars and to make sure that your name is clear. And really, really appreciate your testimony today. Thank you to all the witnesses, and I yield back.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, for holding this very important hearing. It's actually one of the most important things that we can do from this hearing is highlight what in the world is TANF. Because no one in our country knows what this is. And it's been a significant portion of our budget for many years. Look, would love to jump right into it. Mr. Favre, you know, as former quarterbacks, you and I, we have so much in common. Yeah, you're a Hall of Fame quarterback, and I'm a redshirt freshman from Utah State. You're a Super Bowl champion. I led a late fourth quarter comeback for the Snow College Badgers against Pima Community College back in circa 2001. These are all well documented. I'm sure you've heard of them. And we're both predecessors to what we hope to be, me at Utah State and you at Green Bay, to one of the best Packers to ever play the game in Jordan Love. Obviously, you're everybody's favorite Packer, but we hope Jordan Love has an incredible trajectory going forward as he's played in my home state. But on a serious note, the other thing we have in common is that you and I want to make sure that TANF dollars are spent responsibly and that they're done for the purpose of what they're supposed to do. You talked to me before the hearing, and then you've mentioned it here. You have no idea what TANF was. This is my biggest frustration with anything that we deal with from our mandatory side of the budget. We have a mandatory budget, or otherwise known as direct side, and then a discretionary budget, or appropriations bills. And those bills get voted on every single year. And they're able to sustain a small 1 to 3 to sometimes 4% growth rate. But these other programs that they're intended to do the right thing, they're enacted, and then for decades we don't touch them. Is it any wonder that A, no one knows about them, and B, they have all of these wrongdoings? And we've talked a lot about the Mississippi situation that you didn't even know you were a part of. We got several other states that have all gone through major improper payment at a minimum. Fraud gets involved in all of this stuff. And it's no wonder, is because we, as members of Congress, are not able to vote on this stuff on an annual basis. And it's my biggest frustration. I don't want to make you regurgitate everything, but I do want to just highlight, and let me say, my heart goes out to you and your family for your diagnosis. It's catching some media that you've announced this morning. You've been diagnosed with Parkinson's. Heart goes out to you. I think you'll continue to be an inspiration to people in numerous walks of life, because you have been to our the sports world at first, and then just trying to do good, and you get caught up in stuff. But you're here, and you're trying to make awareness on something that needs to be. So outside of the awareness issue that you're providing today, and the general, you mentioned, there needs to be more accountability and more guardrails. So let me just throw out one more thing. We have a bill. I've introduced a bill. It's called the Restoring Temporary to TANF Act, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. We want to make it as temporary as possible. Mr. Underhile, you mentioned it. This is as the ranking member points out, this needs to be a bounce back. You need to be able to take advantage of this program and get yourself back up on your feet. Any thoughts to the importance of workforce? This would actually require 25% of these dollars to be set aside for work activities, getting people the job skills that they need to be able to get out on their own again. Any thoughts to how, would that be something that fits into your realm of what you envision for this program going forward?
Yeah, and listening to everyone up here today, jobs seems to be the same theme. And I agree. There's nothing better than doing a job, whether it be at your own house or at a work, and feeling confident of the job that you've done. And it pays. So it's twofold. It makes you feel good about yourself, but it also pays you a salary. So I think it definitely is a big part of success or lack thereof.
It's part of how we want to make this program a very productive program. We need a chance to roll up our sleeves and deal with this legislation and not just let it go on autopilot for years and years and years until more improper payments and other bad activity takes place. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Thank you to the other witnesses today. We appreciate your stories, and I look forward to hopefully working together on this in the future. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for your patience staying here. As was just touched on, Mr. Favre, sorry to hear about your diagnosis of Parkinson's. I actually lost my uncle a year ago today. He had a 35-year battle with Parkinson's. I know the impact it has on a family. If he was still alive, he would have been thrilled to meet you. He was a huge sports fan. Mr. Underhile, I want to thank you for your courage to come and share your story with us, a truly inspiring story. You talked about the challenges you faced and overcame, but you also laid out very clearly that with a hand up and people saying, we've got your back, you're on a path to chart your own new course. And I think that, as we talked about, is the whole purpose of why we do programs like TANF, temporary assistance to needy families, to help someone who's down on their luck or whatever the circumstances may be, to get back on their feet and to succeed. And that's why I'm frustrated that as we are wrapping up September, a less than productive September here in Congress after almost 2 years of less than productive on this committee, a less productive 2 years. We've had no hearings in this committee on child care. We've had no hearings in this committee on paid family or medical leave, no hearings on the earned income tax credit, on the programs that can actually make a difference in people's lives and help us. I think we do have common ground across both sides of the aisle here of wanting to help lift up people. We recognize that, especially with TANF, there's a lack of oversight, and we need to be implementing oversight to ensure that we don't have stories like we've heard today. Mr. Dortch, if I turn to you, I know it's not news that in Mississippi, 1 of 4, or only 4 out of every 100 families living in poverty receive any assistance, the cash assistance from TANF. Making matters worse, in 2020, a state audit shed light on the horrifying intentional malfeasance in the state TANF program, alleging that tens of millions of dollars were spent in questionable ways, something that we should not accept or tolerate in any way. Congress took a critical step toward investing in families and caregiving when we provided economic impact payment stimulus in 2020 during the pandemic, when we passed the American Rescue Plan in March of 2021. In fact, ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, strengthened income support for families by temporarily expanding the 2021 child tax credit, significantly investing in child care. And as was mentioned earlier, that investment in the short period of a single year cut child poverty in this country by nearly a half. Mr. Dortch, given your expertise, what are the best uses you see of TANF funds that will alleviate poverty, and how can Congress work to ensure that those funds are reaching the people who will benefit them and not being redirected or misdirected to folks who have no need or no use for these funds other than enriching themselves?
Yeah, I really think having the cash resources to be able to survive is important. Putting wraparound services with that is also important. But let's remember in Mississippi, when the child tax credit happened, our income, our state income levels went up, our economy went up, our tax revenue went up. This is because people in Mississippi who never had disposable income actually had disposable income. And that disposable income stays in the community. And counties that don't have jobs, they'll eventually have jobs if you have people that can actually spend at a grocery store. We have pockets of our state where there are no grocery stores, and people have to drive 30, 40 minutes to be able to shop. This isn't just about, giving someone a check. It's about investing in people that don't have the resources to be able to lift themselves up because of the nature of our state and the nature of our economy. Our state is different than others, but the fact that we're not even trying to address some of these issues is heartbreaking to me. But
Dang it, I'm going to steal back my time just to close. A great rabbi, Maimonides, created a hierarchy of charity, or of helping others. The worst is to do it reluctantly. The best, the highest way to help someone is to teach that person the skills and give them the resources to get a job, to take care of themselves and take care of their family. Mr. Underhile, you touched on that in your comments. I want to thank you again for that. What we should be doing is making sure every single dollar we commit to invest in families, invest in children, gets to the people who need it and is not redirected for other reasons. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. We have 374 votes have been called. We have 374 people that have not voted. We're going to try to see how far we can go. Mr. Feenstra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to each one of your witnesses for coming and your testimony. TANF gives states the flexibility to determine how they will help struggling Americans to get back on their feet. The flexibility is a powerful tool that TANF has, allowing programs to be catered to the unique challenges of each state. In Iowa, TANF funds are used for family investment programs to provide direct assistance to families. But it also has a program called Promise Jobs that helps them find a job, and so they no longer need to be on assistance, so they have a purpose. I have 3 great stories. A 29-year-old father who got a commercial driver's license now is a trucker that got off TANF. A 25-year-old single mother who supports her children now does not have to be on TANF. And finally, a 33-year-old mother who had a criminal record but was connected through Promise Jobs and found now a great paying career to support her 2 children. Mr. Underhile, you have an amazing story, just like the 3 stories I've noted, and I'm very proud of what you've done to turn around your life and have a purpose with this position you have. Just like Iowa Promise Jobs program, Missouri has Skills Up program, which is awesome. And a lot of these programs, just like you're in, have a component called peer mentors so that they can share common experience and trust while you're working through the real difficult challenges. Can you share, you're now a peer support specialist. Thank you for doing that. Can you talk a little bit about that and why it's so important that we need peer specialists in these positions?
You need somebody sometimes just to talk to, somebody that is relatable, somebody that's been through what you've been through. It's hard to open up and talk to people that you don't relate with. And having that support system just increases your chances, honestly. And with the education, like the Excel centers that are in Missouri, I don't know if any other states have them, but to be able to go back to school as an adult and get your high school diploma and it not cost you anything, and have the assistance there to get you back in the workforce, educate you. Why could we not support that more than we are?
Absolutely. I thank you for that. You know, like you said, you know, peer mentors, if we can work alongside somebody and make sure they're successful, you know, that's what this is all about. We want them to be off TANF and to have great careers and be successful and have a purpose in life. So I found it interesting. You said that you found Skills Up on Facebook, and that scared me a little bit, like, okay, why aren't we pushing this out a little more? Can you explain that just a little bit? You know, what should we do to promote these different programs like Iowa has, Promise Jobs, you have Skills Up. I mean, to me, this is the difference maker.
Absolutely. I think marketing and getting this out there is, I don't know why we're not doing more.
Yep.
We should be doing everything we can.
Yep.
There's a lot of people that have no idea the opportunities that are out there.
Exactly right. Oh, thank you. Mr. Adolphsen, you pointed out in your testimony that $31 billion of TANF funds that went out in 2022, only $2.5 billion went to jobs, training, and education, such as Promise Jobs and Skills Up. Can we talk about this? Should we expand these dollars? How do we make it more important that we try to figure out jobs and opportunities instead of everyone just staying on TANF?
Great question. Unfortunately, if you build it, they will come. Doesn't work here. You have to go find those people. We have the money. This program has the money. We're looking at these unobligated balances. You talk about promoting those great programs you have in Iowa that are working well. We need to get people that are coming in the door for every welfare program, food stamps, Medicaid. Those programs have grown by tens of millions since TANF was instituted, and the objective is to reduce government dependency, not just TANF dependency.
Yes.
And so that's the place we need to capture those folks, bring them in, and get them in these good programs.
You nailed it. Absolutely. We want to get them off subsidies. We want them to have great jobs, and we can do that, but we got to find them and make sure that the programs work for them. But to me, it's a state's job, and whatever we can do. Thank you for your testimonies, and I yield back.
Mr. Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be honest, I was a little confused when we were announced that there was going to have this hearing, and that's just because of the fact that my Republican colleagues haven't really talked about how to help working families since I've been back on the committee. Here, let me throw out a question out there. What's the #1 state with the highest maternal mortality rate in the country? Mississippi, right? There are programs out there that can have a profound impact on poverty in Mississippi, on lifting up people, reducing the maternal mortality rate. One of them is expanding Medicaid in those states. It's not surprising that most of the states with the highest maternal mortality rates in this country are the same states that haven't expanded Medicaid. It's something that that state could do right away. But we haven't had a hearing on that, how the Affordable Care Act has cut maternal mortality in this country with the states that actually implemented it. But then we're having a hearing on TANF and fraud. You know what? Fraud has no place in any program. And the reason why I care about that is not only because it's protecting the tax dollars, but because then it undermines the public's confidence that a program actually helps the people that it's intended to help. The American people, I believe, have a big heart. They want to help folks when they're at the most in need, and especially make sure that they have an opportunity to succeed. I mean, that's what makes this, I think, this country great, is that caring for one another. I care about what happens to folks in Mississippi because those are my brothers and sisters as much as the people in my congressional district in Los Angeles. Right? Any kind of poverty in this country is an affront to our values. So I do believe we have to do something about TANF. That's why I joined my colleagues, Representative Davis and Chu, in introducing the TANF State Expenditure Integrity Act. And this bill would establish a TANF program, integrity unit at Health and Human Services to prevent and root out potential misuse of federal funds by state governments. But my worry about this hearing, it's not really about, people will use it as an excuse to add more barriers to preventing people from actually getting the help that they need. We've seen it before. You know, that system is broken, let's change it. I knew about TANF back in 1997 when I was actually a college student and I was interning for a Republican County Supervisor in Riverside, California when it was switching over. And it was back then, it was about how do you kind of make these programs work better. But this program used to serve 80% of needy families 3 decades ago. Today, it just serves about 20. Does that sound like it's an effective program? But are we looking at like, but why is it, right? And I don't think it's, and I think it's because of a lot of the extra requirements in some states that are making it impossible for people to use. Mr. Dortch, can you talk about some of the barriers like upfront job search requirements that families face in accessing TANF programs?
Sure, I mean, and that's one of the most striking requirements that prevent people from being able to access the program. And we're not just talking about cash assistance, we're talking about everything from the wraparound services that folks need. When poverty has been so criminalized in our state, people don't want to come to a place where they feel like they are going to be the subject of some type of investigation. I mean, after the TANF fraud, we literally passed a bill to allow the state auditor to audit the tax returns of people that receive these benefits, even though there was no necessary reason for it. People don't want to feel like they're going to be looked at as a criminal when they come into something. So when we talk about people not accessing, not coming in, not knowing what TANF does, in our state, it's not a friendly place for you to go to. You don't feel like that's somewhere you need to check in to see if those resources are available.
And that's kind of a great point, is that if we add extra barriers, it makes it difficult. One of the greatest successes we had, we talked about it, is the enhanced child tax credit that cut child poverty by 50%, actually 40 to 60% depending on the community. And it's because it got the money out quick, it got it to the people who needed it, and there was appropriate checks to make sure that those people actually were supposed to get that money. Right? If we want to look at programs that succeed and how to make it work, especially for poor working class folks, let's do it. But to kind of like to do TANF, to say that we care about working people, I'm not sure if that really passes the smell test. I'm willing to work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We have some good ideas on ours. Let's get together and have the conversation on how to move forward. Thanks.
Mr. Carey.
I want to thank Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses. First, unlike most federal programs, TANF does not have the obligation or spending deadlines for the funds. In fact, according to GAO, the amount of unspent TANF funds has more than doubled from $4 billion to $9 billion since 2015. And in 2022, 45 states and the District of Columbia had unspent TANF funds. This is a shame, as Congress appropriates the money to help needy families, and that's why earlier this year I introduced the Improved Transparency and Stability for Families and Children Act, or H.R. 7410. This bill would ensure that states aren't sitting on unused TANF fund year by year by establishing a 2-year period for obligating the funds for an additional year to spend each fiscal year with the grant award. Now, I have a lot of questions for you, but we do have to go vote, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the ranking member for holding this hearing. I'll attempt to be brief as well. Mr. Favre, want to thank you for your courage and bravery in sharing your diagnosis today, and all the best to you and your family. and for those suffering with this as well, making sure that they also have the resources and the providers to receive the care that they should. You know, what's interesting also about this hearing is the fact that I'm from Nevada. I ran one of the largest job training programs in Nevada before I came to Congress. In fact, we were one of the leading providers for workforce training to move people from welfare to work. But the question is, what kind of work? And unfortunately, today in America, 6 million workers make as little as $2.13 an hour because of a sub-minimum wage that they're paid, particularly tipped workers. That's under the law that they're paid as little as $2.13 an hour. And this is really a Jim Crow era policy, and it's why I've introduced a bill called the TIPS Act to eliminate that sub-minimum wage, to raise the wage, and to eliminate the income tax on tips, because that also can't cover the cost of rent, childcare, and utilities. But since its inception in the 1990s, Nevada has historically received limited levels of federal TANF funding due to historically low state investment in its predecessor, the Aid to Families with Dependent Children program. In fact, according to analysis from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Nevada has only raised the maximum monthly TANF payment by $40 for a single-parent household over the past 30 years. When adjusted for inflation, this modest increase actually translates to a 40% reduction in the real value of direct assistance to families. Recognizing the impact of direct assistance, last Congress, we worked hard to expand and enhance the child tax credit through the passage of the American Rescue Plan. In my state alone, approximately 353,000 families received $449 per month, and 40,000 of Nevada's children were lifted from poverty into the middle class, thanks to that child tax credit. So, Mr. Dortch, in your experience, what are the tangible benefits of expanding access to cash assistance to working families, and how could this be an effective complement to expanding access to affordable child care, health care, and housing?
I think what you saw in our state is that improved our economy, that created more jobs, that allowed people to have increased incomes, to be able to spend money in their community. As you mentioned, jobs in itself is not just the answer if you're in a place where there aren't any jobs. And there's so many places where the vast majority of people are working in service jobs that pay low hourly wages. And there aren't plants or manufacturing jobs in most parts of our state. So these are jobs that depend on money circulating in the community. And we don't have those jobs because you have so many people that don't have disposable income to be able to purchase anything more than what's necessary. And in a lot of cases, not even that. So we saw an increase in incomes in our state, and we saw an increase in tax revenue in our state. I think our state economist has acknowledged this. Our political leaders have not. They just say our economy has been great because it's been great. Although, you know, if you step out of Mississippi, the economy is terrible everywhere else. But in Mississippi, we have benefited from those investments because it added to the revenue moving through Mississippi.
Yep. Well, I just hope that we would look at some of the best practices of policy that works, and the child tax credit works in lifting children and families with children out of poverty, and we also need to look at jobs that pay poverty wages. And $2.13 to me is a poverty wage in 2024. You cannot pay the rent, you cannot cover child care, you can't buy groceries and utilities on $2.13 an hour. So if we're serious about addressing inequities, then I hope my colleagues would join with me in moving forward the TIPS Act. With that, I yield back.
Thanks. I would like to thank our witnesses again for appearing before us today. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be part of the formal hearing record. With that, the committee stands adjourned.